Today. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the July 10th City Council Workshop. It's 5:30 p.m. We have a pretty full agenda, so we're going to get right to it. If you wouldn't mind, that we do have people on Zoom, so if it's your turn to speak, please make sure you're speaking into a live microphone so people can hear you and the record is clear. Also, if you can remember to turn off your cell phones, silence them. I haven't done that myself, so it's a good reminder for me as well. And the first item on the agenda is Sergeant Garibay to talk about update on emergency management and preparedness. How's it going? Good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been, I don't remember, at least a year.
Yeah. All right, I'm on mute, so.
How's the audio now? Better?
Yeah,
Okay.
you gotta kind of get right on it.
Okay, perfect. Good evening, council. As Mayor Preed mentioned, my name is Nathan Garibay. I'm a sergeant with the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office, and I manage the day-to-day operations of our emergency management program, which serves the entirety of Deschutes County, including the cities. Predominantly now, since City of Bend has developed a program, we focus primarily outside the city, but we do work very closely and support City of Bend as well. That does give us a little bit more, hopefully a little bit more bandwidth in the future to support other areas of the county while being cohesive with the City of Bend as we kind of grow our regional emergency management strategies. We also work real close with Crook and sorry about that. Crook and Jefferson counties, which is particularly, I think, important, especially in the Sisters area because of, I think, real close ties with parts of Jefferson County that I think are very closely tied to the Sisters community. I would say that here in Deschutes County this time of year, probably in front of mind is wildfire and the dangers. And I think that's been highlighted the last few weeks with the Darlene 3 fire. And then over the weekend, we had the McCaffrey Road fire out in the Redmond area. Our agencies worked real hard to develop some processes with partnerships with the city and other agencies to build not only relationships, to build processes that can be quickly implemented in times of fire and emergency. So we've been able to test those this year. Unfortunately, we'd prefer not to test them, but we have been able to test them this year. And I'd say by and large, successfully, but as always, we always want to capture those opportunities to learn from and to grow and to make improvements. So primarily, some of the things that kind of the differences from last year to this year is if you go to our deschutes.org/emergency, which historically has just been a map, we're starting to build out more content on there around general preparedness, but right now a lot of it is related to wildfire preparedness. But our goal there is to kind of make that the one-stop shop for not only like what's going on now in the community as far as it relates to emergencies, but then also what community members can do to prepare themselves and their families and to stay informed. So I'd encourage you to check out that dashboard and make good use of it. So that's where currently, if we have an active incident, that's where you can see a map of that incident. You can see current evacuation levels, if there's a shelter in place, if there's an animal shelter in place, or a location for displaced animals. Additionally, on other tabs, there's direct links to sign up for alerts. There is information about how you can prepare your family and home. And then we're going to continue to build content into that. And a lot of that actually, a lot of the content in there has been driven by conversations we've had out in the Sisters area. We've been working over the last several months with Sisters Fire, City of Sisters, city, and particularly Public Works, as well as county and state partners to evaluate some lessons learned from the Camp Fire in 2018. There's been recent reports released from the National Institute of Science and Technology and look at that and see if there's opportunities for improvement in how we do business and if there's local applicable improvements. And a lot of those conversations out of that have gone to help drive and inform the content that we have on that dashboard now.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I'd be happy to just, that's kind of the general overview. We had a lot of things going, but I'd be happy to just field questions if that might be more valuable to the council and the community here.
More comment related to the
Your microphone, please.
more of a comment related to the Redmond fire, which sat on two jurisdictions right down the county line. So we had two sheriff's departments and two other groups providing information. And at times, from an end user perspective, it wasn't really clear who was on first and who was on second. And I'm wondering if there's a way in the future to, when those sorts of things happen, they're not going to happen often, but they will, to kind of have the information that's going out, say on the Crook County or whatever the other sheriff's department is site, be echoed on the Deschutes site and vice versa. I mean, I could get the information I needed by going to both, but for a citizen who really isn't familiar with how the system works and who is panicking about whether or not they have to flee or tie up their animals or move them somewhere, or, those kinds of things. Having a single place where all that stuff pops up in front of them when it's multi-jurisdictional would be a good idea. And I realize this is all in its infancy for you guys. So, but that's just a comment that I noticed. And that's the first time we've had that sort of a fire really literally burning on both sides of the county line.
Yeah.
And two sets of organizations providing evacuation notices and those sorts of things. So just a thought.
No, I appreciate that comment. And I think that's definitely one of the takeaways that we brought from that. We did have some tools in place. Unfortunately, technology always fails you when you need it the most. And so we were endeavoring to do that. And we missed a little technical component of the service dropping when we updated a map and it didn't actually update. And there was a slight confusion for a little while.
Yep.
And that's definitely something that we just need to double check in the future and work to rectify that connectivity, which was kind of the root cause of that problem. But that's great feedback. And I think you're right. That's important. I think not only is it important that we do well as far as being effective at getting those evacuations in place and the fire suppression going on, but it's also important that we communicate that quickly and accurately to the public, because that confidence in that response is always affected if we don't do a good job of communicating what we're doing, even if we're doing the right thing. So I appreciate that comment. I think that's very valuable.
Yeah, and I've signed up for all the alerts, so I was getting some and not some and that kind of thing. I was getting through a third party, so I was, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll tag on to,
Your microphone, please.
I'll tag on to Councilor Ross's comments. So I think tagging onto the idea of a person who's new to the area, probably everyone mostly has a cell phone. So whatever we do on those websites for people who are not connected to the emergency call system, they should probably be able to see very quickly, some little icon or something that they can click on, and this is very advanced, but understands where they are and can give them the information they need. So that's probably something in the future to be worked on. And the other thing I'm curious to know from you is your thoughts on Core 3. I know it's in its very, very infancy, but I just would like to know your perspective on how excited or not you're about it, what you think it's going to bring to the community.
Yeah, well, first of all, to address your comment, I think that technology is evolving, and I think that's important for us to stay on top of that and utilize it to the best of our ability. Our dashboard is mobile capable. I think there's opportunities in the future to make it more of app-based potentially, if that tech, again, it's an Esri product, which is phenomenal capability, but yeah, I think as we continue to evolve our public information tools, we'll continue to take advantage, hopefully, of the best available resources. As far as Core 3, I think Core 3 presents a very bona fide opportunity for Central Oregon. A couple things come to mind is one, it would provide facilities that would provide the level of quality of training that we would expect our first responders to get. and that in a lot of more urban areas around the country, they routinely get that level of quality of training facilities. And so I think that's critically important, particularly as as agencies work more and more together to have that kind of common ground on how and when and where we train, provides better opportunities for that kind of integration of how we operate and do business. I think it also poses significant opportunities as far as response to major catastrophic events. We know that there's a catastrophic event that's on our horizon somewhere. We don't know when, and hopefully none of us will ever see it realized. But
Cascadia subduction zone.
yes, exactly, the Cascadia subduction earthquake. I think the reality of it is that making investments now in critical infrastructure to help the state prepare for that, and our communities prepare for that, is a wise investment. If you look at communities that are able to bounce back quicker from disaster, a lot of that is investments made long before that disaster happens to be able to allow communities to better respond and then recover. And I think Core 3 is just a component of that infrastructure package that, is needed in the Northwest to help with that. But if you look at like the 2020 Labor Day fires, there was significant amount of regional response that was happening even outside the Willamette Valley and the direct affected areas. And I think facilities like Core 3 would be beneficial to those kind of larger scale responses. The other component of that is it would potentially give us another training opportunity to train people in large scale incident management. If you look around the United States, there's a few places in the country where you can go to get very high quality in a more realistic training environment of like managing large scale disasters. Things like Texas A&M has a facility, and then obviously the National Fire Academy Emergency Management Institute in Emmitsburg, Maryland. But outside of that, there's not a lot of opportunities, particularly those that would be similar to what we hope to see at Core 3. So hopefully that wasn't too long.
Good. That was good. And just for any of the public that doesn't know, Core 3 is going to be established in Redmond near the airport. It's going to be a very large facility and very helpful to our emergency community.
Thank you.
Are you doing any like tabletop exercises or preparedness exercises with the communities in the county? Or especially kind of at the municipal level with staff or councils or leadership? I think that was something I would like personally, because I think when it hits the fan, there's always this moment of what's my role?
Yeah.
Not my role
Mhm.
is also an important question. And obviously, walking through that and some sort of even quick tabletop or something could be really beneficial to.
I think
That was going to be my ask, is
Yeah.
maybe walk through, I don't know if wildfire is a good example, although it's probably the most pertinent or relevant for our area. But if an emergency happened in Sisters, like a flood or the earthquake or something, what happens when the EOC is activated, what the role of the city is in that. And so maybe just illustrate that, for the council and for the citizens and city to kind of understand what is the ICS system and everything.
No, we'd be happy to deliver that. There's actually some CAN training that we can adjust accordingly to the needs and the wants of the jurisdiction. So it's actually a FEMA class for local and senior and elected officials. And we can do that in anywhere from about 2.5 to 4 hours, depending on I guess the willingness of the audience. But I think we could do that, or we could do a hybrid of that and incorporate a tabletop. I think that would be something we'd be happy to deliver at your request.
Yeah, so to illustrate an example though, so if say there was, the dam broke and there's a flood, or I guess we wouldn't have a landslide, but an earthquake or a significant snow event or something like that. can you walk through like the process of, the activation of the OC?
Yeah.
Kind of who becomes, what the command structure looks like. I think the council's always, my experience, councils are always interested in what's my role, as an elected official when there's an emergency. And
Sit
it's like,
back and watch.
yeah, get out of the way, spread them information, be safe. You may be called to come to emergency meetings if we need to, have emergency expenditures to get dollars out the door for emergency contracts and things like that. But
'Cause that's, the media, will find our phone numbers and
Oh,
they
yeah.
call us first.
and you want to have
Yeah.
the
And,
right
so,
information.
It's kind of all, being prepared ahead of time to know what our role is and again, what our role isn't.
When they call us first, all I can think of is the movie Airplane, but that's another thought.
I'm just gonna say, talk to Counselor Letts. That's what I'm gonna do. No. No, is my biggest fear as mayor is just, figuring out what my leadership role is gonna be. It's not gonna be a lot. It will be probably facing the media and the citizens more than just about anybody else. And, my biggest fear is that something happens and someone says, well, what are you gonna do? I'm like, well, I'm gonna be down at
gonna-
City Hall trying to figure out what
Talk
the experts say, because I'm not the expert. So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think first and foremost, you are the elected voice and face of the city of Sisters, and I think that's a very valuable role that you play. Each community, each jurisdiction is going to kind of have a slightly different expectations for elected officials. Historically, it seems like most often in cities where there's a city manager, the city manager kind of is the one that takes the leader's intent essentially from the council,
Mhm.
the desired end state, task, purpose, and end state, and then converts that into kind of a position of the city to work with other cooperating agencies. But a lot of that's going to be outlined in city charter and code and what responsibilities and authorities you have and when you need to activate those. And I think those are really good conversations to work through. And then fundamentally, I think there's a time and a place for elected officials to be that face of a disaster or to choose a spokesperson, that can make an informed comment or statement to the public because they seek you out for information and a sense of comfort with what's going on. So I think those are great conversations to have, and really it can be what the city wants it to be to the greatest extent. Obviously, I think from working with the city council over the years, it feels like you have really trusted staff that you devote a lot of that trust into, and we work really closely with them. And so obviously they're usually our first point of contact, but we obviously want to make sure that we're supporting kind of the greater, not only the city, but the greater Sisters area as far as if we're making sure we're representing the values and the needs and concerns of the community.
And we do want to speak with one voice because that is discomforting to the public when we're not.
Mhm.
No, it's not.
well, it sounds like there's collaborative work we could do, but there's also sounds like work that we can do behind the scenes as well to make sure that we know what we want to happen. And make sure that the citizens know what to expect, I
Yeah.
guess.
I mean, there's an advantage and disadvantage of what the situation we're in, right? So we have a fire district, we have, emergency management's managed through Deschutes County, who obviously contract for police services. And those typically, depending on the type of emergency, will take the command of the certain incident, right? But the city has an important role too with our public works operations, right? Obviously, depending on the emergency as well. And then being the elected officials and sort of the mouthpiece, right, would be involved sort of in the PIO sort of roles and sort of backup operations, logistics. And then it's on us as staff to make sure we're feeding you,
Mhm.
the right information, the relevant information, the same information, so that you guys can then get out there as well or answer questions and, speak to the media if you want to be the person in front or have that as staff or the PIO that's a part of that ICS structure. So, but the disadvantage of being small and having these things contracted out is really like we don't have a lot of
Mhm.
EOP plans and things like that, right? Because we don't have an emergency manager, it's run through the county. We have what our natural hazard mitigation plan, it's updated every 5 years. I think we're probably doing it in a couple more years to update that. Obviously wildfire, we have the community, plan. That's a couple years old, but still pretty updated. So there's some gaps, I think, in terms of our overall just emergency preparedness, continuity of operations plans and things like that. And it comes down to capacity to be able to do that and leaning on the county and others kind of help us develop those plans. So it's something that we can collectively work on, think about council goals, how we kind of level up our sort of emergency preparedness as a city organization. And I think over the last couple of years, we've been really focused on how do we beef up the communication outward and get people prepared, emergency preparedness, have go bags, evacuation routes and things like
Mhm.
that. But as an organization, I think we can probably invest a little bit more in preparing and understanding what we do in the event of emergency.
Right, and the one thing I do want to remind people is, your elected officials, every 2 years, there's an election, and so a lot of us, when we first start out, we get up here and go, well, what are you gonna do when a fire starts? Well, we're gonna ask the right people because we're new or just don't know yet. So that's why we have these plans and we try and stick to them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so maybe having some sort of even basic ICS or something.
Yep. Well, that's what,
Maybe every 2 years
I think that,
would be a good idea.
yeah, having served on the Emergency Preparedness Committee for Lane County as the education rep for 8 years, knowing how the ICS structure works is helpful. And I think I'm probably, well, you also probably have some background in it, but if you've never really seen how that works and how those roles are very clearly defined, and the incident commander is going to be different depending on what the issue is, it's helpful for us, I think, just to see how that structure works and understand why all of a sudden someone's coming and telling us what to do. It may not even be a part of the town. There are reasons for it, and there are very good reasons for it, and it's to ensure that everything happens safely and clearly. And there's also certain kinds of lights and certain kinds of vehicles, just the things you might want to know and need to know to assuage fear as a public spokesperson. But I agree totally. And, you know, I think that it doesn't have to be a 4-hour emergency ICS structure, but I think even just a sheet and maybe a list of the acronyms and what they mean and who's what. So we can at least speak intelligently, might be helpful to this group.
anything that's the size I can stick to my fridge is a good thing.
Exactly.
How big is your fridge?
I know. It's
I
good.
It
mean,
has lots of
I've sat
good
through
stuff on it.
40, 50, 60 hours of training
Yeah.
and it's all gone. I mean, it's been a long time. If you don't do it every year, you need to say it right off the top, as you well know.
Well, it would be my pleasure to support city manager and staff on being back before you with, we can scale what you feel would be most valuable. And then as far as those other plans and processes, we'd certainly want to support that and help you get where you need to be as a city. I think that's important, not only for the city, but it's important for the county because we are such critical partners with each other.
Mhm.
Emergency Preparedness 101, I think you got 4 or 5 head nods still. Maybe we can set something up for later in the year or, maybe next spring or something. That'd be good.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to.
Great. All right. Any other questions? You got any final comments, Sergeant?
No, other than just that, it's always a pleasure to come out to Sisters. I appreciate the engagement and the support that you have of us and I know it's always just a pleasure to be out here. Nice smiling faces. So I always appreciate that. And just the work that you do to support the safety of the community, I think is incredibly valuable. So from my perspective, thank you for that.
Well,
Well,
thank
we
you.
appreciate you too. It's
Thank you.
a two-way street, right? All right. Thank you. Appreciate you. We're going to move on to the next item yeah, right.
Hopefully it takes care of it.
East Portal 90% design review. Director of Public Works Protect. What's up? What's going on?
90%.
90%?
I'll just
Need-
plug that we are working on the naming policy. So
The naming policy.
you need to have a little asterisk when we
Paul.
talk about the East Portal.
The mic.
Don't forget your mic there, Paul, just when you get there. Very cool.
It's amazing.
Okay, so this is not the first time that you have dove into the East Portal design. You're a big part of the master planning process where we ended up with a definitive concept plan that everybody agreed on. And we took that and went out and hired Gilson Associates to do the design for us. We took it to a 30% design, took it to our Public Works Advisory Board, got comments from them. Went back, refined it further, got it to a 90% plan stage, which is essentially almost there. You got all the pages, you have your tree preservation plans, you got your site plans, obviously, utilities, down to the stripe and the lighting. And then your most important, your concept, cost estimate. So with that, that really tells you where you're going to be going into the environment, and comparing that to existing funding, potential future funding. It's important to have those numbers as close as we can get to real life. So see out in the street. So with that, we've got Russell on the virtual call, and he can help us out. He was the lead designer on the project. Any engineering questions, process questions, Russell can weigh in, provide us the answers. We'll dive through. You've seen the 90% plans, so we're not going to look at those tonight. We will look at the tree preservation layout and obviously process.
All right. Is Russell with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, we can hardly hear you.
Okay, I'll speak up. There's no one left in the office but me.
That sounds better. Thank you.
Okay.
Pretty master plan concept. Very straight lines, a lot of parking stalls. Really have that, and so we have short-term, long-term parking lots. We have thought to do actual transit, drop off and pick up spots. We have RV parking, more feature long-term parking, as well as additional parking down the McKenzie. 6 spots set aside for each park. Where to start? And we divvied it up a little bit into a phase just because of the size and complexity of it. Phase 1 is light blue. Phase 2 is purple. So when we started looking at this and design stages, we knew what we had in the budget. We decided to combine phase 1 especially with the revised parking layout, to be able to combine those two, provide some cost savings, get down to bidding projects and constructing them, not having to duplicate mobilization costs, control costs, those things that both phases really made sense to us to just combine those and get functional transit stuff right up here. So we went from that really pretty parking lot design and surveyed every tree, all the existing structures out there. And we ended up with get back parking, straight parking, compact parking, get all the really to nestle the parking into existing landscape, try to save especially partial trees. We're successful in doing that. We did lose a little bit of parking almost overall. Probably the biggest change is the RV business at the heart of the campground that provides services to the public. It's very convenient, not only to the public, but for campers. So having these efforts dedicated or beat up was necessity to us. We were able to put that in there. The west side, and it allows about 4 or 5 moderately sized RVs stacked, which is about signage out on the highway to help with that. The only other thing,
I can tell you that is indeed true.
Okay.
More fun with it.
Too bad Joe's not here. He always has one in his pocket.
Magic
Just
wand.
wanted to point that out.
have the RV over here.
And then we got obviously the parking area. Our transit providers will come in here. This is one way, once you get past this parking lot, ingress, egress. This is the first Sawtooth. This will be the primary transit stop. If this one's full, the next bus can come in and actually stage here, then up here in the future. This is primarily the center of where people will be waiting. We'll have eventually a bus shelter right here. We got some benches. Kind of focused our lighting right around this area for safety and security. And then from here, when people do come in, they could come around here and there's a nice little drop-off spot here. So all of this is raised curb. This is concrete right through here. And then they're able to easily access the transit provider. And then we wanted to provide a good connection to the existing restroom. So we got a raised crosswalk right here. Again, we're going to have this with lights over that. And that's really, other than a couple other parking lot lights, lighting, that's pretty much all we're doing for the kind of the large parking lot lighting.
All those gooseneck style lights that are spec'd out in the 90% plant LED. They do have some sideways light scatter. Are they going to be, we're going to be able to make our dark sky compliant stuff with those?
We're working with Scott on that. The biggest thing is they're set so far back from the adjacent property lines that it won't be a problem.
Yeah, and I know there's also anti-trespassing shields that can go on them as well.
Correct. And we may, we'll see what gets submitted with the construction drawings. We may see a different light completely out there. So. And then from there, we have connections into the scenic byway kiosks, informational kiosks here, as well as concrete sidewalk down to here. And then we transition to a multi-use path to come down to the southern part of the site. The project also includes a 10-foot multi-use path on the south and the west side of the site. And that'll give us a 360-degree multi-use path system around the entire site. And with that, we'll also have a connection coming into the restrooms from the Santiam path here.
Question.
Yes.
On that south exit of the bus, is that crosswalk going to also be raised?
Lost it.
Because that's where the students walk by down there these days, going to lunch and stuff.
So where are you talking about?
The exit of the bus on the south side of the whole,
Oh, down on the McKenzie?
yes,
Yes, that will be, well, that's all going to be essentially asphalt on grade.
okay.
Yeah.
But will there be a raised sidewalk?
A raised crossing right there. There
Yes.
isn't right now.
But will there be?
If we put it,
Could
there
there be?
could be, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, for the same reason we want it raised up there to draw attention to it. I think it would be important there also.
Okay.
It's my suggestion. I don't know if council agrees, but that's what I'm thinking.
Why does it need to be raised?
But the same reason we have it raised up there for the toilets is to make sure that the bus drivers see someone coming across. They know it's a crosswalk.
What bus stops there?
Any of the buses that start using our hub.
During the day when
Yeah.
the high school students and stuff get out and come
Yeah.
down 242, they walk down along the existing road to get to
Yeah.
Snow Cap and places like that, so. I'm not sure it's as significant.
But they're not getting on and off buses.
No, but that raised crosswalk can
Right.
just designate where you go over to the restrooms. The raised crosswalk kind of does two things. It slows traffic just moving through the venue, so it could slow a bus down. Oh, thank you. It could slow a bus down, and if you have cars that ignore the left turn arrow coming out of the parking lot and decide they want to go that way, it'll slow them down. So it's a safety issue.
The reason
there
it's
enough-
raised up there by the bathrooms is though, because it's a raised curb. So what you're doing is you're raising the roadway up to it, and that's why it's raised.
No,
Make it flat, straight across, so the bus has to kind of go over it, right?
yeah, right.
Makes it ADA as well.
I mean, that's one way to do it, yeah.
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 Yeah, you could have a curb ramp there too,
Yeah.
so.
I think we had a version that it was raised, and I think, I don't know, this might be, talking more about the cost estimate. It might have been something we looked at moving out to a future phase because of trying to keep the phase
Cost
one
down?
cost
down.
down.
Yeah, because straight asphalt will be cheaper than the concrete
Yeah.
and the work necessarily to do that. But
Well, I know we're doing all the work on Mackenzie itself to have raised crosswalks. So this entrance
McKinney,
on McKinney, sorry, thank you.
the other
Um,
Scott.
Yeah,
Scott, yeah.
so, and it's the same reasoning, for coming out of that utility hub. That is the exit, right? Or is it the entrance end?
That is the exit.
Yeah, that's the
yeah.
exit, yeah.
I'm torn, and I'm torn. I'm a firm believer in them, by the way. I'm a big advocate for them. I've seen them work, and I know how they work in other areas and how much they slowed down the street that I lived on when they were put in. The question becomes, how much traffic will be going out that exit as a utility hub during the day? Does it warrant the cost of raising the crosswalk versus the ones on McKinney where you've had traffic all day long, vehicles and everything moving at a fairly high rate of speed? I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question, I guess.
We can have our traffic engineer look at it and get his professional judgment for sure.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
And the other alternative would be striping, I suppose, to say,
There absolutely will be striping
yeah,
either way.
right.
Yep.
Along those lines, I have a phase 3 question. I know that in the, when the Sustainable City Year presentations, that some of the students worked on, there was a really, I think, valuable idea to put a crosswalk across, Highway 20, somewhere near, that one, bus stop that will be along Highway 20. And is that idea still on the table? And I kind of bring that up because right now there isn't necessarily a huge need because there's not a lot between the two possible crosswalks, which are the roundabout and then all the way down at Snow Cap.
Not a lot of residents, yeah,
But there will be.
but there will be.
And, the Forest Service office is moving up the highway. So we'll be more directly across from the East Portal than it has been. And also, we have a finger of the development up there that will also be commercial facing there. So I see quickly, hopefully in a few years, there's a lot more development on that stretch where there will be, I think, a lot more need for people to get from point A to point B without having to go to C, D, and E to get there. So I just want to know if that is still a possibility on the table, also in the respect that we technically own that part of the highway.
So remember, Woodlands is required to do a enhanced crossing in that area to take care of their development, and that's actually scheduled for phase 3, which they're just getting ready to start.
And
So-
enhanced would be the flashing lights or spike strips?
Increased signage, potentially RFPs, yeah, enhanced informational, advanced signage for the crossing. We don't know exactly what that looks like, but it will be
Okay,
more than
just
just a
curious.
standard crosswalk.
Do you have a guestimate where that might be or is? to be
It'll be at the
determined?
Hood Avenue intersection,
Okay, so farther up.
Yep.
Okay.
where ODOT already put those curb ramps going across there.
So will it be ODOT that determines whether what they are suggesting to provide is appropriate?
Yes. Yep, it's
Oh, yay.
crossing their jurisdiction, so you bet.
You know that.
Okay, any other questions on the 90% site plan?
I do on the signage. I have a question on the signage.
Okay,
And it's probably a stupid question. But, in the document, there's the existing signs and then there's the proposed.
Yep.
And in the existing, we have, for example, a sign for the, labyrinth, but it isn't in the proposed. So is it the existing and the proposed? Or does the proposed signage replace the existing?
both. Both. There were some existing signs there that are going to stay,
Okay,
and then there's some new signs.
okay.
The labyrinth sign's already there. There's no reason to replace it.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
That,
It's a full inventory, essentially.
thank you.
I did have one other question. Is there a place or infrastructure in place, meaning power and possibly water, if there was any sort of food cart vendor that we felt might be a good addition to this at some point? Kind of going down the road of, we've talked about different amenities that could possibly be at the site co-located. Sometimes the more amenities you have in a travel center, the better, because you have more eyes on it. It's a little more safe for people coming and going. And so, even like a coffee stand for commuters or something like that might be something. So I'm just curious to see if there would be at least enough, power or water or a space available for something like that.
Definitely enough power, enough water. As far as where it's going to be located and do we have something definitive going in the ground? No, but we will have electrical and water throughout the site that we're going to be able to tee into. So, yeah, that's a pretty easy addition.
Okay, thank you.
And with this, phase 1 and 2, we are including electrical conduit coming down the egress to serve the future EV charging. So we're going to put that in with a vault down there. So it's basically ready to go for when the EV charging project starts.
Is that where that number 6 is over there?
Correct.
Just making sure.
So tree preservation wise, we worked really hard to try to minimize tree removal. With this much infrastructure going in, it's impossible to avoid all removal, but we try to keep it to the smaller trees, the less healthy groves of trees actually in and around that restroom area, and that raised crosswalk is a pretty unhealthy stand of pine and juniper in there that actually need to be thinned. And then junipers obviously were less of a priority than keeping the ponderosa pines. And we worked really hard to save the large old growth. So I think net savings on the trees was 11 trees. The majority of those were the old growth ponderosas.
Looking at the plan, some had circles around with double X's around the circle. Those are all on that little cluster, probably smaller trees slated for removal as opposed to the big ones with a great big X in them.
Multi-stem potentially.
Okay, I
Yeah.
just was kind of curious. It was a different sort of a notation than what it shows up above.
Sure. Hey, the cost estimate came in, we were about 1.2 million. And that includes a 15% contingency as well. We started when you combined phase 1 and 2 in the conceptual master planning, we were a little over 2 million. So we were able to drop that a little over $800,000. And the majority of that is, the original plan from the concept, all of that was raised curb all the way around the site. We went to asphalt on grade, which, you start throwing curbs in, you got to deal with stormwater, you got to build stormwater facilities versus just letting it shed off the roadway into the natural areas and infiltrate like it does today. So doing that saved a lot of money, combining, again, phases, keeping that construction duplication to a minimum helped as well.
The asphalt roadway going down through for the buses, with a number of trees and everything, we're not worried about heaving, root intrusion, that sort of thing?
When you have
That'd be a
asphalt
nightmare for you
and
guys to maintain, I guess is what I'm asking.
when you have asphalt and ponderosas, you can be pretty sure that you're going to get some root heaving eventually.
Yeah.
You don't know which trees. I mean, sometimes you put them right next to the road and you don't have a problem. Other times they can be 100 feet away and they heave the road. So,
And I'm assuming that the asphalt layer will be significant to handle the transit buses.
absolutely. Yeah, no, it'll be engineered for that. And, dealing with the tree roots is a lot easier when it's just, you're dealing with asphalt, you're not dealing with curbs, a lot of concrete sidewalks, those type of things. So we took it to, like I had said, our Public Works Advisory Board twice, the last time on June 11th. They recommended approval of the site plan as is. And then we also took it to our Urban Forestry Board and they worked with us to, again, tree preservation and the tree removal specified to the trees that, are less desirable or more unhealthy than the ones that we're trying to save. We also got it in front of our transit partners, got feedback from them, and reached out to the community labyrinth. I mean, they're right there kind of in the middle of this, and they're going to be surrounded by this infrastructure. And so we got some good comments, feedback from those guys. So next steps, take the revisions from you guys. Feel free to email them to me as you look at this, think about it. We're going to take that feedback and get us to 100% design. Want to do that fairly quickly, and then we can start getting our bid specs and bid package ready to go for a bid let in the fall 2024. Start construction this winter, January 2025. We do have, with the difference in our cost estimate at 1.2 mil and our available funding through the STIF grant that we got of almost 900,000. There's a funding gap there. We are going to be able to go back through the 24-25 STIF cycle and ask for dollars to bridge that gap. So that happens this fall. They're already aware of it. That was kind of the plan when they gave us the original ask, was we had it reduced from what we originally asked for, and with the anticipation that we would be coming back for some bridge gap funding. So with that, we'd like to get this thing open for summer 2025. Yeah.
I have a question about the tree removal. Is there any way we can save the wood from some of those trees and maybe help out members of the community that might need firewood and stuff like that? Or do we just sell it in bulk in general?
Typically, these contracts are set up to where it becomes the property of the contractor.
Okay.
That allows them to
Do it at their pace and do it at their.
do it what's more efficient for them versus us telling them, how to do it.
Yeah.
Log links. Yeah.
Definitely would add cost then, is what you're saying, for sure.
Yeah, and it's not the
Complexity.
most ideal firewood, green ponderosa.
Just asking.
No problem.
I have a quick question. So on the diagram, would the possible dog park be up here? Or what were we thinking if we were going to have a dog park?
So we were looking at this area. Here's the labyrinth right here.
Right.
We got some real estate right in here. And we got multi-use path. We also have water right here.
Uh-huh.
There
okay.
was about a third of an acre right in here that we were contemplating with the Parks Board.
Thank you.
No decisions have been made.
No decisions have been made.
No, we want to get, the foundation in, and then we can start working on the
Yeah.
trim.
Park and park.
Okay.
I haven't been making any comments because I've been through this enough times with the various other boards who have put many questions through to Paul. So I've heard a lot of explanations of why and how and when. And I also know the forestry board members are after every tree that is viable under any circumstances. And I know how much they had to maneuver in order to save some of those trees. And so I recommend that people recognize how our Public Works Department, not being tree huggers exactly, but are very, very empathetic to our long-standing ponderosas especially, and do make every effort, as long as it doesn't bust the budget. If it can be accommodated, they do it.
As the Urban Forestry Board rep from the city council, I would say that this final design was fairly well received, especially when Paul talked about the efforts that were made to save the trees, and that the bulk of the trees being removed as much as they could be were going to be junipers, and how the multi-use path, while it's drawn in a certain way, will actually kind of is designed to maneuver around the trees rather than being a straight line and things like that. So, I mean, there was some unhappiness about a couple of trees going, but they also realized realistically we were leaving the bulk of the healthy trees to stay.
Yeah, you won't be receiving any comments from me. I think it's been vetted in much more detail than I could ever get into. So. All right, any other questions, comments?
My last comment is, I just thought all the work that they did in those diagrams, I was amazed. I was looking at sheet after sheet of detail for, having runoff and, where the curbs, it was amazing to me. And it was sheet after sheet of instructions and details. It's amazing stuff and not very pricey.
Well, relative,
Well,
Yeah.
because I know that's a lot of work.
Cheaper than roundabout.
All right, thank you, Russell. Appreciate you being here.
Right. That was an easy one.
Yeah.
We're not too tough. All right,
Okay, great, thanks.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Soldier on with that. Just checking the time. Looks like we're going to go over time a little bit. I'm sorry about that to the people in the audience that are here for the regular city council meeting, but we'll get to it when we get to it. Our next item on the agenda is a Central Oregon Civic Action Project, Civic Assembly. And Josh.
As Josh comes up, I'll do the introduction here. I think it was back in April, the City Club of Central Oregon did a presentation about citizen assemblies. And I think a few counselors were able to attend that. And we got kind of jazzed about that and this concept of a citizen assembly, and members from C4C were there, and we're talking about how Sisters is such an engaged community that has, I think, the foundation to really, take something like this and maybe, run a project and kind of set up a structure. Look at the success of the Citizen Leadership Academy that we just went through. So we were intrigued by it, and then Josh reached out about talking about the City of Sisters and possibly partnerships on looking at a citizen assembly, but also they have a pilot project they're working on. So Josh has been going to different boards and commissions, kind of explaining what this pilot project for the civic assembly is in Deschutes County. And we thought, given that we're in Deschutes County and citizens will have the opportunity to opt in or be a part of this process, possibly through the lottery, that would be good to get a presentation and kind of update the council on what this project is. answer questions about citizen assemblies, and the work that Josh is doing and the stuff that's going on here in Central Oregon now. So thank you for being here and, yeah, look forward to the update.
You bet. Thank you. And thank you. I'm really excited to be here this evening to talk with you and see some friendly faces again. My name's Josh Burgess, Director of the Central Oregon Civic Action Project, also known as COCAP. Tell I'm a former military officer. I spent 25 years in the U.S. Air Force, Charlotte Clinton Common, and recently retired to the area and live in Bend, but consider myself a citizen of all of Central Oregon. What I'd like to talk a little bit about first is just the Central Oregon Civic Action Project to give you some context. It is a partnership of a number of other organizations I direct that is in essence intended to be a civic engagement hub for the entire region, all three counties and Warm Springs. Right now, our first focus is on this first pilot project of a civic assembly happening in September and October. As Jordan mentioned, we realize, and I realize as a relative newcomer, that there's a great amount of civic engagement here in the local region. But nonetheless, there are those who don't have the opportunity to be involved. And in fact, probably the majority of the residents and community members here, for a variety of reasons, feel as if maybe they don't have the opportunity to sit down at a venue like this or to serve on nonprofits or on boards. We're trying to increase access for everyone. In fact, you'll see our tagline for COCAP is a seat, your seat at the table for everyone. Our long-term vision is just helping to shape a more vibrant and civically engaged community where everyone can have that seat at the table to take part in making shared decisions for the future. So a citizens assembly or civic assembly is in essence a representative group of local community members who are selected at random to broadly reflect local demographics. They then come together over an extended period of time to learn about a specific topic in depth, and then to deliberate together in a moderated fashion and come up with a list of prioritized recommendations for local decision makers and policymakers. There have been over 700 of these types of assemblies conducted throughout the world in the past decade or so. Interestingly, most of them in Europe, South America, Canada, but not that many in the United States. And there's a large degree of interest right now as we look at divisions that seem to be increasing, not just here locally, but across the country. Although you can see many of those national divisions that are reflected here locally. And that's why we're very interested in putting on something that can bring people together from all walks of life to take part in that decision making. The objectives that we have long-term are really to, and actually it's both short-term and long-term actually. So in a specific civic assembly, we're looking to enhance your ability as local authorities, elected and administrative officials to increase policy and governance outcomes, but also to bring people from a broad variety of backgrounds from all walks of life together to actually rebuild their faith in public institutions, which has been flagging very much across the board in the past decade or so. And then finally, to actually bridge divides amongst members of our community who many times don't see one another as neighbors as much as we used to in the past, or maybe instead see one another as someone in a social media comment section who we've lost some of the empathy that exists when you sit down over long periods of time with one another and have deep conversations, understand people's personal experiences around specific issues. So as Jordan mentioned, we are now conducting our first civic assembly here in the fall on youth homelessness, specifically in Deschutes County. We will broaden this out more broadly to the rest of Central Oregon as we build this capacity. Our first one is just with Deschutes County. Our intent is to have 30 members of the community who will be chosen at random with some demographic stratification, who will come together for 4 days. The first 2 of those days will be learning in depth about the topic of youth homelessness here in our region, which unfortunately is a very large problem for us. COIC was awarded over a $1 million grant last year, just specifically to address this. You may know they founded a youth action board of young people who have some lived experience being unsheltered, who we're going to collaborate very closely with to ensure that they've got access and we're empowering them rather than stepping into their space. They will collaborate. They'll come together for those 4 days. I'm cognizant of the time we have allowed here. I can anticipate a couple of the questions you may have on how this random selection goes on. I will say that 2 weeks ago, or about a week and a half ago, we sent out 12,500 invitation letters to completely random residences across the county. And we know that a large number of them landed here in Sisters. We know we have had responses from volunteers. Anyone who lives at that residence can volunteer if they're 16 years of age and above, as long as they're not a current government employee. We also distributed 250 more of those invitations through service organizations for people currently experiencing houselessness to ensure that they're represented as well, in addition to the Youth Action Board. Once those responses all come back to us, they will answer 7 demographic identifying questions, everything from obviously where they live geographically to their age, race, gender, educational level attained, and political affiliation. And those are asked very deliberately because we want this to be a representative group that represents the demographics of the county. And so once those come back to us, we expect to get 400 or 500 responses out of the 12,500. We'll take all of those answers, put them into a specifically designed calculator that will then determine probably several thousand possible permutations of 30 people from those respondees who would represent the demographics of the county. And then of those several thousand, on August 1st at the Downtown Bend Library, we'll hold a civic lottery where we'll actually draw numbers out of a lottery ball to choose one of those several thousand. So there is a true random nature to who is involved. And then they'll come together to deliberate, make recommendations, and deliver those back to a gathering specifically of members of the Regional Housing Council who the recommendations impact. COIC is going to help us to put that gathering together, members of the CHRO. And very critically, and this is the last thing I'll say, is we find it to be of the utmost importance that this isn't just a gathering where people come together, learn about something, make some recommendations, and then no one ever finds out what happened, which is why we've worked very diligently and we're so thrilled to be here with you this evening. We do have memorandum of understanding signed now with the Bend City Council and with the Deschutes County Commission, where they've agreed to endorse this process, but also, very importantly, to accept those recommendations, deliberate upon them publicly, and report back to the community on whether they're going to implement the recommendations. And those recommendations, also just one last tidbit, are supermajority recommendations. The facilitation of this assembly, we show that it's very important that people will move out of their comfort zone to endorse recommendations. It also limits the number of recommendations that come back so that we don't have a lot of wild hair type of 50-50 ideas. And I'll pause there then and see if you have any further questions that I can answer.
Can you turn on your microphone, please?
I just want to say that I fully support this effort, and I think it's well thought out, and I'm excited it's happening. And it is a very, very important topic that you're hitting.
Thank you.
Aside from the importance of the topic, which I also agree with, I am very impressed with the deep and diverse selection process that you are utilizing. I've never seen software that will do all that, what you're talking about, but hey, more power to you. But I like the idea that whatever the final X number is, 400, 500, whatever, go into the bin, and you have kind of the public drawing that my researcher wife would applaud your total effort to be random in your selection.
Thank you.
Welcome to Central Oregon.
Thanks.
And I mean, you addressed it a little bit. I just, if there's any more details you can add on making sure that, it doesn't end up on a gathering dust on a shelf somewhere, the recommendations. But I mean, you addressed it a little bit. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, there has been, so I did not mention who our three partners are. Our three core partners are an organization called Democracy Next, which is an internationally renowned, they call themselves a research and action committee that are basically the foremost experts on deliberative democracy and civic assemblies globally. They're giving us their game plan and playbook on how to do this, although most of them have been in Europe, so we're adapting it to this context, which is why we're also very happy to have another nonprofit that is Oregon-based called Healthy Democracy, which was instrumental in putting together the Citizens Initiative Review for the statewide several years ago. They have implemented these programs before. And then our third partner is OSU Cascades and the Laboratory for American Conversation, which is going to be conducting research on how we can improve our dialogue as a community. And in essence, and I now that I answered that question, I lost track of what you asked. I apologize, Counselor.
I think
Right.
the MOU with the county and Ben, right, kind of obligates the council to deliberate on the recommendations, right? So going into it, there's already the built-in sort of structure that this work by the Civic Assembly will lead to the elected representatives taking on those recommendations and studying them and seeing if how they implement them.
And the research shows that internationally, over the course of those 700 or so previous initiatives, that more than 50% of the recommendations are implemented by the governing authorities because they're so well thought out and so well informed, and there's been a great amount of time and effort put into making the recommendations.
Are you going to include any other entities, because this one is youth specific, I'm thinking school boards and school districts?
Absolutely.
Because, we're not, we can only do so much. We've been talking with our superintendent here a little bit about this issue of, one solution being, building, high school dormitories. There's a number of school districts in Oregon that do that, so kind of, one solution there. So I just want to make sure that, you're getting some good product, that it's getting to the right ears, I
Yep.
guess.
Yes, we are. We're talking with school districts, with the Forest Service, with a number of other local entities that have a role to play. And some of the recommendations that come out will almost certainly be directed more toward them than to actual city or county officials.
Okay, thank you.
So one of your mysterious letters arrived in my mailbox when you started describing who the participants were. I looked at it today and I thought, do I tear this in half and throw it out because it looks like a political ad? Luckily, it had the insignias of the 4 or 5 participants at the bottom, City of Bend and a couple of others. So the timing wasn't great in terms of the political season. So I doubt you'll receive a response from our household because I'm an elected official. If you want it, you can give it to somebody else or.
Well, if anyone else in your household would like to participate,
We'll
we
see.
didn't touch on family members.
Right.
I'd love
Or
to
should I just kind of carry down Main Street and stick in someone's back?
There we
pocket when
go.
They're not looking. That'll be totally
I
random.
would love to address just very, very briefly the idea of why now.
Yeah.
We'll be coming out with these recommendations probably a week or two prior to the election, and it's very deliberate. We've got a lot of national attention on this. We've had outreach from 4 different states and cities who want to come and observe and see if this is something that might work for them. And so kind of the eyes of the country in a small way are on Central Oregon to see if this is something that will scale out to other communities to help bring us together. And
So if you get a letter in your inbox and it's from a group called the Oregon Group, you name the name, to resident, don't throw it away.
thanks.
I don't see this particular issue as being really political in many senses. But I was wondering if you do get into topics that are more divisive and political, who decides what the educational piece is?
Thank you. Great point. We are actually putting together an independent content committee who will not be composed of any government officials or even the implementing group ourselves. And those are local service organization heads, people with lived experience who will actually then have almost a mini assembly to come to consensus on what subject matter experts they believe the assembly should hear from, who will bring in to speak, what data and information they should receive in a packet that we'll put together. Also, the young people who will come in and actually speak, or even other people who've had experiences with homelessness. So that is somewhat independent to ensure that there's transparency and no misperception of any kind of agenda there. And the same thing with our external compliance and evaluation board as well.
Where are you getting your funding? I mean, that sounds like a hugely expensive undertaking.
Our budget for this is $250,000, and it has almost all been privately funded through donors. We've had several dozen local donors and family foundations. Because this is fairly new, and there, as I mentioned, there's a sort of national level interest. We have had some national level foundations that have provided us catalyst funding, but that's a one-time gig. In the long run, we want this to be public and private funding here. And we think that when we show the efficacy, that it'll just make sense. The Rockefeller Foundation is one, Forticus, Omidyar, several other foundations have donated.
Nobody that you could point at and say, aha, they're part of this. So obviously this is a lefty or a righty.
I mean, I think anyone can do that at any time. We have tried our best to ensure that we're remaining clear of those types of affiliations. We're taking funding from a variety of different individuals and foundations, and hoping that that everyone will see here that this is not in any way politically driven or affiliated.
Yeah, very interesting. I think that everybody's going to be watching and see what comes out of this, you know. I'm not ready to sign a memorandum of understanding as of yet, but you know, maybe we'll see how this first one goes, and you never know. I mean, right?
Well, can we discuss that later on our general meeting?
Yeah,
Okay, good.
Okay.
And we can always invite Josh back. I mean, I think
right.
we've talked with C4C too about, you know, something that we can all collaborate on and scale it to, you know, a model that works at our scale, 4,000 people, what that kind of pool looks like, how, you know, what the costs look like, what the topic would be.
Yeah.
I mean, there would be a lot of work going into this.
No, I
They're
think
busy
that's
with
the
this
most
pilot
important
project,
thing.
but
I
yeah.
mean, you know, that's what I'm saying. So, you know, everybody's going to be watching it and seeing how things
Yeah,
go,
it's
and
interesting.
you know.
You do, and you get a stipend for participating too, as a.
Yeah, accessibility is critical. So there's a stipend for each person involved that's equal or roughly equal to minimum wage. Also cover transportation costs and family care, child or elder care for those involved, and translation services as well.
Good.
Right.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much. We're obviously behind schedule. This workshop is adjourned. We're going to start the city. All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to call to order the city council regular meeting. It's 6:50 p.m. It is July 10th. If you guys wouldn't mind, please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. Roll call, Rebecca, please.
Mayor Breeden,
Present.
Council President Blum,
Here.
Councilor Letts,
Here.
Councilor Ross,
Present?
Councilor Cobb. Present.
All right, next up is the approval of the agenda. Note that there is an amendment to the approval, so if you could read that with your motion, please.
I would move approval of the agenda with the amendment.
A second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. That's everybody. Next up is a visitor communication. We do have a visitor communication period in a public meeting later on, which concerns TA 2404, I think is the number, the zone change. If you're going to speak in that, you'll have to please wait for that topic to come up. There will be time to speak at that in probably about 15, 20 minutes, maybe not even that long. But we probably have some regular visitor communication.
Yes, we do. Rodney Cooper?
Just so everybody knows, hi Rodney. We try and limit everybody to about 3 minutes so we can get the meeting over at a decent hour. So you have about 3 minutes. Please state your name and your address for us and thank you very much.
So I handed out, or I had the recorder, I guess it is, hand out my proclamation that I wanted to introduce to the City of Sisters. And basically it's a proclamation designating the month of July as Patriot Month. And I'm going to read it very quickly because I have a few comments to make afterwards. Whereas the City of Sisters believes in the sanctity of the United States of America and all those who are legal citizens therein should be encouraged to celebrate their patriotism and love for their country. Whereas a patriot is hereto defined as a person who loves, supports, and defends their country and its interests with true devotion, values individual rights of all people, and defends those rights when necessary. Whereas Patriot Month is a time to show thankfulness and appreciation for the brave men and women of the armed forces who defend the rights of our freedoms of our country and honor the veterans and first responders in our communities. Whereas Patriot Month is a time to reflect on the founding principles of the United States of America, the Declaration of Independence, and the U.S. Constitution. Whereas citizens are encouraged to proudly display their American flag, wear patriotic gear, attend events, and support the spirit of patriotism and renew their commitment to participate in elections. Therefore, be it here resolved that the City of Sisters Council does hereby proclaim July 2024 as Patriot Month in the City of Sisters, Oregon, and urges all residents to join in celebrating and promoting patriotism. So just to reiterate, to define patriotism, just love and support of country. And I would think that that would be most everybody, all citizens of the United States. One of my concerns is that the voter turnout is very, very low, 34% in Deschutes County. And we know that when patriotism wanes, our country becomes vulnerable to and susceptible to other forms of government. President Reagan put it this way. He says, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. So what he recognized is that when our patriotism is down, we're vulnerable. And our forefathers talked about vigilance. We have to be vigilant. We have to maintain a culture of patriotism because evil is relentless. It's going to keep taking ground unless we confront it. And confrontation does not have to be decisive. I think divisive. I mean, divisiveness kind of it intimidates people from confronting rather than having a civil conversation that might be confrontational. So there was a time in my life that I thought the fight was between Democrats and Republicans. And it really isn't. It's really a fight between good and evil. We need to recognize that. So basically, there's efforts out there to destroy the sovereignty of this country. There's plenty of talk about a one world order rather than a sovereign country. What happens then if we give up the sovereignty of our country? We have an oligarchy of rich people and they're experts trying to run our lives. So just in conclusion, I would like you guys to seriously consider making this proclamation. Ask yourself, explore your own patriotism and consider doing this for our country to help us maybe get the voter turnout higher, more participation, and save our country. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your comments. Just so everybody in the audience knows, we do discuss some things at the end of our meeting that we want to discuss, and someone may want to bring that up if they so choose. We have others?
Michael? Appears he's not in the room.
All right. Thank you, Michael.
Got a better offer.
Stephen King? I'm not sure. Is this for the Sun Ranch Tourist District text amendment?
Yes,
It is? Okay, so we'll take your,
I wrote it on there. Mobile
yeah, I
home.
wasn't sure.
Okay, should I come back?
Yeah, we'll have another opportunity a little later. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Josh Smith?
Hi, good afternoon, counselors. Thank you for having me here. I am here. My name is Joshua Smith. I am a local small business owner of the Paper Place at 171 South Elm Street. I am also a Sisters resident at 523 North Fremont Street. I am here today on behalf of the Sisters Business Association to give an update on what we've been working on. Over the last month, we worked closely with the Rotary Club to create a business passport that has been given out between the Rotary Club at the 4th of July event at the Sisters Fourth Fest and at they're in the bags that the quilters are given. So they're expecting over 1,500 passports to be given out. These passports are, if a business has chosen to be on it, they have, all of the business have a stamp, and we have a coupon in the book, and the quilters go from store to store. So it's helping drive the business. They'll get the stamp and possibly use the coupon in the store. And so far, over the first 3 days, 3-4 days, it's driven quite a few customers that may not have already been in, that I know I can attest to, and some of the other businesses that are doing it. So it's been working. And I say that because as a small business owner, Saturday of the quilt show is obviously the biggest sales day of the year for almost every retailer in our community. However, the week leading up to it, we have always struggled more so. So this passport has done a lot. And I would also like to thank C4C, who gave a grant to the Rotary Club to be able to help fund the printing of the passports. So that was one of the major things that we've been working on to drive business this particular week.
You want to speak to the winner too of the passport contest?
Oh, yes. So very huge. So this year is the 49th annual Sisters Quilt Show. And Jean Wells, who started it and originally started the Stitch and Post, she made a quilt specifically for this event. So the winner will get the Jean Wells quilt. And we're also very excited for next year, the 50th anniversary of the quilt show. There's a lot of big things coming up, and speaking with the Sisters Outdoor Quilt Show board. So,
Let's do something big.
big, got to make it really big.
50th.
Anniversary, and that's really, I know we have the rodeo, but what really drives people to town, in my point of view, there's nothing bigger than the Sisters Outdoor Quilt Show. So what they do for our community is invaluable.
The heat hasn't been bothering folks, huh?
It has, but we did a special event last night as well that the Stitch and Post helped put together called a Sip and Shop. So a lot of the retailers in town stayed open an extra 2 hours until 7 p.m. As you know, our town shuts down at 5 p.m. for retailers. So some of us served some beverages and had some snacks, and so it did drive some additional business through that as well.
All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more in this visitor communication block?
Is there anyone on Zoom who would like to make a public comment? Please raise your hand.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, next up is the consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve that?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
A second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Thank you so much. On to council business. Here we go. We only have one main item on the agenda. There was another item that was taken out in the approval of the agenda. But we're on to our public hearing and consideration of ordinance 538. 4 pages of script, everybody, so get ready to have your ears on for a minute. This is a time set aside for a public hearing on city file number TA 24-01, an application for text amendments to the Sisters Development Code, Chapter 2.12, Sun Ranch Tourist Commercial District, submitted by John Skidmore on behalf of Ernie Larrabee. This meeting is now called to order. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. Staff will make a presentation. Entry of additional correspondence received into the record will be presented. The applicant will be given opportunity to make a presentation. Then opening of the public hearing for testimony in the following order: testimony in support of the proposal, testimony in opposition to the proposal, and then neutral testimony. Then the applicant will have an opportunity for rebuttal, then questions of staff, if any, by the council. Then we will close public testimony portion of the hearing. Then there will be discussion and recommendation by the council. Testimony will be accepted in person or remotely via Zoom. If you would like to speak, please provide your testimony after you are called. If you do not wish to provide testimony, please say no testimony after you are called. Any questions should be directed to me as the mayor. When you testify, please state your name and address for the record, and please speak clearly and loudly to ensure testimony is heard, as this hearing is being recorded. Callers will be muted after their testimony concludes. At my discretion, I may limit testimony to 3 minutes per person, and I am going to recommend that right now. I would encourage those wishing to speak to keep testimony concise and relevant to the issue before us this evening. It is encouraged to simply agree with a point made by another person instead of remaking the same point. For the deliberations, the applicable substantive criteria are listed in the staff report. These are the criteria that council must use in making its recommendation. All testimony and evidence must be directed towards these criteria or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or other land use regulations that the person testifying believes apply to the decision. Testimony that is not directed towards applicable or potentially applicable approval criteria, even if it's a strong point, is ultimately not relevant. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to afford the council and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. At this time, I will ask if any counselor has any conflicts of interest. If so, please disclose the nature of the conflict and whether the member believes the conflict would preclude the member from objectively participating in these proceedings. Counselor Letts.
None.
Counselor Blunt.
No.
Counselor Scott.
No.
None.
Okay, I don't have any either. Does any person in attendance desire to challenge the participation of any member of the council? Does anybody on Zoom wish to challenge the participation of any member of the council? Okay. It's now time for the staff report. Mr. Martin?
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, councilors and those in attendance here in the room and online. I'm Matthew Martin, Principal Planner, City of Sisters Community Development Department. As introduced by the mayor, what's before you tonight is a public hearing on proposed text amendments to the Sun Ranch Tourist Commercial District and Chapter 2.12 1-2 of the Sisters Development Code. For reference, this is land use file TA 24-01 and ordinance number 538. And point of clarification from the script, what's before the decision point for the council is a decision on the adoption of the ordinance, whether to approve or deny, not a recommendation. So my apologies for that script variation. My comments tonight are in support of the staff report that was provided to you in advance of tonight's meeting, including the draft ordinance that included the applicable criteria and findings drafted by staff. So what I'd like to do is provide you an overview of the district, the proposed amendments, and the process to date. Happy to field any questions throughout or afterwards. Also want to acknowledge that this is a legislative process. And so with that process, there's more flexibility with the extent of questions and comments that are afforded or presented by the counselors throughout this process. So feel free to ask those questions and assert your kind of opinion through those questions or comments throughout. Also want to acknowledge that joining us via Zoom is Garrett Crossteck, City Legal Counsel. So he's here in support of staff and City Council if you have any questions about details of the proposal, opportunities for the council, and any procedural questions.
Garrett, can we test out your sound, please? Can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you. Can you hear me, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, just wanted to
Great.
make sure it was going to work in case you get a question.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So first, to get oriented to the location of the Sun Ranch Tourist Commercial District, located in the northeast portion of town, in proximity to the Sisters Eagle Air Airport and the remainder of the Sun Ranch districts and development within the community. In particular, the district is comprised of 3 properties, the entirety of 1 parcel, and then portions of 2 others. It encompasses a little over 6 acres and is in proximity to the North Sisters Business Park, the Light Industrial District to the west, Downtown Commercial District to the south, and rural residential properties to the east that are located outside the city limits of Sisters today. Also noting that in proximity and above the district is the runway protection zone associated with the Sisters Eagle Air Airport. So within that particular zone, there are additional land use constraints that are applied to those areas encumbered by that district or zone. Existing development in the district includes a structure that was previously used as the Conklin Bed and Breakfast and went through partial renovations to be used as a restaurant, but those efforts were abandoned some time ago. That's on lot 1 of the district. Lot number 2 is a distillery developed on the property, and the structures associated with the distillery are located within the tourist commercial district. And then finally, a portion of what I've identified as lot 3 remains undeveloped and again, entirely encumbered by that runway protection zone.
So if I have a question about the lots, should I ask that now or hold it till later discussion?
I'm happy to field those questions now. I think as we're at this point in the conversation.
Okay, lot 2, the distillery. Did that proposal have to go through any special sort of review?
Yes, so there would have been site plan review, and I don't have that file number committed to memory, but it went through land use review to establish the distillery on that property. I'll note too that after the Sun Ranch Tourist Commercial District was established, there was a text amendment process that the city went through to add distillery as an allowed use within the district.
So it originally was not, and so that was a clarification that was done later
Correct.
at the request of the distillery?
No, it was at the encouragement of the EDCO representative, and then that was
going to encourage the distillery. I see, okay.
but a process initiated by City of Sisters.
And that lot, to the north of that lot is what? of Lot 2? What is to the north of it?
The zone district, or that's the North Sisters Business Park.
And is there anything business there right now?
Not currently developed, just north of the property or the
So
district.
that is not, but it's cut in half as well. Okay,
I'm sorry, so you're speaking specifically to Lot 2?
no, the distillery is in Lot 2, is it not?
Correct. So
So
lot,
what is to the north of it?
It's also on that.
this,
It's also in the other zone as well. Their property is cut in half by that zone.
But it's not in the zone that we're looking at here.
correct. So if you're speaking to that portion where my cursor is identifying.
Right,
That is a portion of Lot 2, but located outside of the tourist commercial district.
okay, so Lot 2 is split partially
That's
with
correct.
two. Okay,
zones, yeah.
Two zones.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And you say district area is plus or minus 6.2 acres. What is the size, the developable size of that? Because you've got the runway exclusion zone. You've got lot 2, which is already in use. And is that 6.2 represented by the red area, or is that 6.2 looking at the entire district area?
It's represented by the red outline. That includes those portions of property that are located between the runway protection zone as well as that area of Camp Polk Road right of way.
And so the portion that is up for discussion is trying to figure that out. It's, but at the request of the developer, what we're talking about here with this amendment doesn't include the piece where you see Barkley coming in along Camp Polk. There's some parts of the zone that are not part of this particular discussion.
No, this would apply to all elements within
Wrong choice of words.
all properties within the district.
So anything that's purple is the district?
No.
No?
Well, because
Yes.
there's more purple.
Yes,
Yes.
everything purple and outlined in red on the image is the
But
tourist
part of
commercial
it is not
district.
buildable.
Right.
Eh,
But there-
Practically, the right of way of Camp Polk Road and any development limitations below that runway protections district would be a factor in consideration.
Thank you.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, the purple, no
Yes.
matter if it's in red or not, is the Sun Ranch tourist commercial, correct?
Yes, so the entirety of this area.
And that other purple on the other side too?
Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, the color palette for the zones is very close. No, this is light industrial or the
Oh,
mini
okay,
storage
so
facility.
it's just those three properties?
It
that you
is
said.
just
Okay,
these these lots.
gotcha.
Can you explain a little bit about the runway protection zone? What can and can't be there?
I can't provide in detail, but the uses are limited within that area. It's based on uses being that structure, size of structures, height of structures are limited. And then any uses that involve congregations of people. I don't want to misspeak, but there's a threshold that limits the amount or number of people that can congregate within that area. So it's very limited in the type of structure, the height of the structure, and type of use.
Thank you.
Give it a bit of history on the district itself. That was approved by the council in 2007. And it was part of an overall, not specifically a master plan, but an overall development pattern of associated districts that included the Sun Ranch Residential District, the North Sisters Business Park, and this tourist commercial district. The vision at the time was that this would be a complete neighborhood that provided residential, employment and business opportunities, as well as retail, commercial, and lodging opportunities that would work in concert with each other. Also noteworthy that the creation of these districts was an application applicant initiated process, similar to this one before you today. So it's not unheard of, maybe rare, but not unheard of applicant initiated legislative zone change or text amendment process.
What was the zoning prior to the application? Was it all industrial or something?
I would need to do some research on that. I apologize
Probably
that I don't
not
have
heard
the
anyway.
detail there. Now to the proposal. What's before you are amendments, again, to chapter 2.12, the tourist commercial district. The intent is to provide expansion and clarity of the allowed uses within the district and apply development standards to those new or existing uses within the district. Noting that these are amendments to the code itself, no particular development is proposed with these amendments. Any subsequent development of these lots would be subject to any applicable and appropriate land use review. So new structures, new use on one of these parcels would go through a site plan review and potentially other applications associated with that. So this is to provide details on what those standards that would apply to any future development within the district. So just want to highlight what staff's identified as the substantive changes to the code. I say substantive because there's some rewording or retooling of some sections, but I believe these are the elements that are of the most prominent in the decision points for the council. So to walk through these briefly, but again, can answer any questions. But the details of the amendments are included in the exhibit A of the draft ordinance. So first is an amendment to the purpose statement of the district. That's removing reference to rural ranch design standards. As we'll detail later, applicants propose to remove the rural ranch design aesthetic within the district. And so with that removal, the reference to this design standards would no longer be applicable. Within the permitted uses is removal of the cottages use. This is recognizing that one, cottages are a newly defined term that is very different than what was originally intended within the district. And that newly defined term came after the adoption of the district and the allowed uses. And so recognizing that the cottage or cabin type of use that was intended at the time of that terminology used would be allowed under the existing definition or existing use category and the proposed definition of lodging facility. Adding retail sales establishment as an allowed use, but recognizing that applicants proposed a size limit on that use. Addition of hostel use. This could fall under the definition of lodging facility that's being proposed, but because hostel is in a specific allowed use within our commercial districts, the applicant and staff agreed that it was appropriate to incorporate that existing specific use as an option as an overnight lodging opportunity. The addition of RV park, including caretaker quarters as an allowed use, acknowledging that an RV park would be subject to proposed specific use standards within the district, as well as special standards that apply to RV parks located elsewhere in the community where permitted. So there would be two layers, the standards that apply to any RV park and then specific standards that would apply to RV parks within the tourist commercial district.
Question on that. Were the standards, you said there's two layers. In what the package we got, are the specific additional standards that would apply in this district alone?
Correct.
And the RV requirements that they also have to abide by are in a different location?
Correct.
And what zones are RVs allowed in now outright?
RV parks are allowed in the highway commercial district as well as the open space district.
Okay.
You mentioned, two things several times, and I'm gonna probably cycle back to them later, but I want to give you a heads up. You know, you say this is the standard, the applicant is proposing something more restrictive or different, retail establishments and things like that. But in reading some of the information that you provided to us, in particular related to RV parks, and the fact that the state has some pretty specific language as detailed under ORS 197.949.493, saying the city can't restrict how long someone can live in an RV park, i.e. reading it carefully, quickly. I understand what the applicant's saying, but at time that the property is sold or changes ownership, that reassurance from the applicant might not follow that sale. Is that correct?
So
Would the state statute then be applicable to a new applicant?
So under the statute, and we can cover that in some more detail.
If it's
And
later in
I'm prepared to speak
we
to
need
that
it
later.
that's fine.
Yeah, so there are other statutory requirements that we need to be mindful of as we adopt local standards and what the authority or lack thereof that the city may have versus what a private property owner can go above and beyond that. But
Well, I understand that
Yeah.
private property can go above and beyond, but properties get sold.
Yeah.
And the designation and the zoning stays.
Right.
And so I guess my question becomes, what's to prevent a future owner 5, 10, 15 years from now from turning it into a residential park as opposed to a transient park?
and that's, yeah, we can detail that a little bit later, and that's an important consideration to keep in mind. Then moving on to setbacks and buffering section of the chapter, applicant proposes to reduce the required setback from Barclay Drive and Camp Polk Road from the current 20 feet to 10 feet. This 10 feet is in alignment with our other downtown commercial and highway commercial district setback requirements from street side. Then moving to special standards for certain uses. So these would what would be above and beyond or specific to a development of these uses within the tourist commercial district. One is a quick removal of reference to laundry establishments. The applicants removed that as a specific permitted use, recognizing that a laundry facility could or would be developed in conjunction with a lodging facility, an RV park or other use. So thinking accessory rather than a standalone laundromat or laundry facility. Removing the 50-foot setback from Camp Polk Road and Barclay Drive. This would have been specific to the neighborhood market. And then the applicants proposed to apply a 1,000 square foot limit to the use and not structures, but rather the cumulative square footage of the neighborhood market use.
Could I ask, Oliver Lemons, would you estimate how big square footage is that market is?
I can certainly look that up during testimony and provide you a follow-up.
Because, 1,000 square feet doesn't mean much to me. My house is 1,900 square feet. So if I said, well, that means my living room and kitchen might be 1,000 square feet. And I don't understand the thinking of why we would want to limit a retail or a grocery store in that area to 1,000 feet. What was the idea of why that would be necessary? Or
Yeah, and I think the applicant can expand on that, but the notion is that these, if we had retail establishment or neighborhood market, retail in particular, the entire site could be developed with retail only. And so the idea is that the retail component of any use of the within the district would be limited in its scale. Similarly, neighborhood market is a defined term that has a maximum square footage of 6,000 square feet. So it's a small scale grocery store. What the applicant's proposing to do is further limit that within this district for the same reasoning with the limit on the retail.
okay, I would like the applicant to justify Justify that, because this is not an application for an RV park.
An application for a lot of other things.
Yeah, right. And so I don't, yeah, okay.
Oliver Lemon's 44. Yeah, okay.
Oliver Lemon's
got some-
about 4,400. Okay.
But
Because
it- but that's
I
the- that's
consider
the-
that a very small store.
But that's the kitchen and the storage area. We're not,
And,
you don't get to see half of it.
and my understanding is in a retail establishment of 1,000 square feet, that refers to the retail portion of the facility. The ancillary locations, kitchens, storage areas, loading docks are excluded from that 1,000 square foot. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we have a specific criteria how we measure the dimensions. Excludes those features, offices, or those that aren't public facing, are not included in the square footage.
This is only the public facing. portion.
Correct.
And does this limit, in regards to that retail, limit access to customers of the RV park? Or will this kind of always be, this would have to be kind of a public retail establishment? Or is
Yeah.
there kind of anything in there that defines that?
It doesn't define it, but the notion is that that retail or the neighborhood market, as we speak to those items, those uses, would and could be public facing and accessible to the public.
And you mentioned removing a 50-foot setback somewhere in here?
Correct. In the code, there is currently a 50-foot setback for neighborhood markets. So the idea that that would be tucked away from the roadways and more centrally or set back
But I don't see that listed here in the changes and provisions in front of me.
in the proposed text.
They did-
Amendments.
I guess I don't read very well. She saw it, so I'll take her word.
Well, it certainly is, it continues to be part of the proposal.
Excuse me.
Mhm.
So, so if some other applicant comes along, and maybe this applicant changes their mind, and they decide that they'd like to create a mall based on this, what's to stop that?
Partially that's 1,000 square foot size limit for those retail and neighborhood commercial, or excuse me, neighborhood and market size limits. So it's cumulative of the uses. So one example, strip mall of individual retail tenant spaces. That would be precluded from happening because the total square footage of retail would be limited to the 1,000 square feet
In that whole 3-lot section?
on individual properties. So a retail could be proposed and approved of 1,000 square feet on lot 2,
Mhm.
where the distillery is. I hesitate to reference lot 3 because the development restrictions under the runway protection zone may preclude that.
It'd be a real short ceiling.
But so are you then saying lot 1, the biggest part, that one could only have 1,000 square foot?
A total of 1,000 square feet of retail.
Okay.
So I think there could be a scenario where you have souvenirs in a portion of a standalone retail space, and then you have clothing, or I'm just trying to identify separate
Right.
retail, that they're isolated independent businesses, but we're looking at the square footage as a total.
Okay.
And you're saying the 1,000 square feet is in the aggregate where it says neighborhood market and retail sales establishment uses, total of 1,000 square feet regardless of what they're called.
Correct.
Thank you.
It does not include food and beverage.
Correct. So eating and drinking establishment is current under a different terminology. And part of this proposal is to, utilize the same terminology we use in other sections of the code, but eating and drinking establishment is and will continue to be an allowed use, not limited by its square footage.
And last but not least, the rationale for reducing the setback from Camp Polk front yard setback to 10 feet.
It was particularly to align with the setback requirements of our other commercial districts.
This is not the downtown commercial area with parking and everything else. It's actually a fairly busy street that's going to get busier as time goes on. And so I know that looks like the standard elsewhere in the area, but I do have concerns about that.
I'll note at the time of the adoption of the district in 2007, the setback requirement was in the commercial districts was a 0 setback.
Yeah.
And since then, so that establishing the 20 foot was above and beyond what was required or allowed in other commercial districts. We've since amended that to go to the standard 10.
They don't all have to be the same.
And adding to Counselor Ross's statement, I agree with retaining that initial 20-foot setback because at some point in the future, we may want to have parking on the side of those streets because we don't have parking designated. I mean, they only have access to the 2 streets that lot does.
Yeah, and noting this is a minimum setback, certainly any structures could and some will likely be set back beyond that
Because it was minimum 50 feet.
for neighborhood market.
Yeah.
That was specific to that. For any other structures, that it was a
For
20-foot setback.
restaurants Or
Right.
anything else.
Right.
That was for parking.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you for letting us beat you up a little bit, but keep going.
Good. I'm glad that we can have this dialogue and begin to flesh out some of the details or the items of prominence to the council. So with the addition of the RV park, the applicants propose specific standards for RV parks in the tourist commercial district. Again, we've already noted that there are special provisions that apply to any RV park that are in our chapter 2.15. These standards would go above and beyond those requirements and apply to any RV park in the district. The applicants proposed a maximum stay of 30 days within a 90-day period. I want to note that we'll discuss that in more detail as it interfaces with other statewide statutes. The applicants proposed a maximum 65% of gross area of any property is the limit of an RV park use, meaning that the RV park cannot encompass the entirety of the lot, but only 65% of that area. And a requirement that at least 2 amenities, some examples are offered within the proposed text, but those specified or similar to be provided, and that they occupy at least 10,000 square feet combined.
A question on the amenities. One of the listed amenities is the pathways and I'm forgetting the term, but it's walkways, et cetera. I think that needs to be a requirement rather than an amenity, so that we have, because we've got it in our vision and also in a couple of our master plans to have connectivity. And not making that a requirement, and the applicant, whomever it may be, picks 2 other amenities. I just don't, I feel very uncomfortable with that.
Okay, so thank you for that input. Acknowledging that, when we're looking at these uses or any specific standards that we're discussing today, I've already highlighted that there's special provisions for particular uses. Also keeping in mind that throughout our code and with any site plan development, any commercial development, there are requirements for landscaping, minimum parking, minimums for drive aisles, pedestrian amenities, meaning pedestrian connectivity and sidewalks. So know that we're looking beyond just these chapters and these standards, but there are those design standards that apply to all commercial uses. The addition of lodging facility definition. Lodging facility is a current term with it and allowed use within the district, but it's not defined. So it's a bit or is ambiguous and admittedly one of the reasons that the applicant has come forward with these amendments is to provide some specificity of what lodging facility means. And so the notion is that there are structures, buildings, and other improvements that are available for temporary, or using the appropriate terminology, limited short-term transient occupancy, short-term in the duration, not long-term residential uses. And so some examples were offered from cabin to recreational vehicles, et cetera, as examples of what a lodging facility could mean. Cabins, I think I mentioned that. And then lastly, the removal of the 1900s rural farm ranch house design standards. Just moving away from that, applicant's interest is move away from that specific design aesthetic. So the removal of the district-specific design standards would then, not retroactively, but by default, implement the 1880s Western Frontier design standards that apply to all commercial districts in this city. So there will be the design aesthetic, it just would not be the unique aesthetic that currently is in place. Okay, so since the workshop, since the planning commission review and recommendation to the council, and since the workshop we had 2 weeks ago, staff has consulted and worked with the legal counsel, and we offered some revisions to some particular standards within the district that were proposed. And also want to note that since presenting these revisions, we've been communicating with the applicant and their legal counsel to further refine these revisions. And so noting that legislative process is kind of a iterative process that comes with various details that need to be discussed and amended. So I want to note, I guess I'll do this in two parts, or noting two different aspects of it, but I wanted to offer this printout of what the final product that's being considered for revisions. I'll note that these revisions that we'll discuss now are not included in the draft ordinance, so it would, any changes that we discuss would need to be read into any decision by the council. So we'll start with the length of stay limit for RV park. So as previously noted, the applicants proposed a limit of 30 days within 90 days. Well, we've become aware of Oregon Revised Statute 197493, adopted in 2021, that provides or limits a city government or municipality from limiting this length of stay within an RV under particular conditions. That being that the RV is used as a residential dwelling, I think is an important term, undefined term, within an RV park, which by definition is more than two or more RVs on an individual property, and that RV park is served by legal water, electricity, and sewage disposal. So either sewer or another circumstance, septic system, for example. So to utilize or retain that duration of stay limit, we felt it necessary to make reference to this statute so that if there were circumstance where those conditions were not met, such as the utilities or the residential dwelling component, that the length of stay limit would remain in place. Noting that this limitation is put upon the city, it's been discussed and agreed upon that perhaps we remove this, the reference to 197 and also the length of stay limit, because it becomes problematic, and 493 would remain in effect, but we'd be removing that duration of stay limit so that there's not conflict or an issue with retaining that length of stay limit.
So are you saying that the RV park could have both short-term and long-term rentals?
There's a potential if the development of any RV park that meets that definition, there's a potential that there could be long-term occupancy of an RV anywhere within the city or an RV park, if it meets those conditions. Again, really emphasizing the utilities that is required to be connected to and used as a residential dwelling.
So could the city, I know we can be more stringent in some ways, so could the city, if we were going to approve some future applicant that wants an RV park there, say the what percentage of the plots that are being used by RVs could be short-term rental?
And this may be where we consult our legal counsel. I believe it would be, the only limit we could place is the number of lots that are served by those specific utilities. And then those would be the ones that are potential for this longer occupancy,
Okay.
meaning 25% are only served. You know, an example at the campground, only there's 60 RV sites, only about 25 provide full utilities.
Some are electric only, some are electric and water. Yep. Some are full hookup. I think that this particular ORS is of concern to me because I think that I always try to look at the unintended consequences of decision made today that comes back 20 years from now that we've made for some future council to have to look at. And I think that amending this zone to include this particular use is a potential issue that we've got to think very carefully about because of the language that was added by the state. And I think that the type of facility that's being suggested by the applicant, and I think that rightly so, you want to have full hookups at each of those sites. That's the clientele you're trying to attract. They don't like only having electric. They want the whole full meal deal. And so there's something we just have to really consider and talk about as we're making a decision on where to move on this. And the 20-yard setback is a problem. Reduction is a problem for me as well. So those are things that as we go through our discussion, be ready to provide more information on if we need to. The language that you have here on this sheet makes total sense looking at the language in the statute. And so that was when I read the statute, I had concerns. You've addressed them here in terms of the language changes. It doesn't remove my concerns about future use.
Fair enough.
I get it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I haven't asked a question yet, so I'd really like to get one in. Hey, Garrett, I'd really like to pick your brain on this. Is the city allowed to limit use of utilities in a zone such as this? Such as if the ORS says ABC constitutes long-term housing, ABC being water, electricity, and sewer, is there any wiggle room for the city to say, hey, we'll allow, water and power, but not sewer? And then does that alleviate the pressures of ORS 197493?
Yeah, so I mean, that is an untested theory as far as I'm aware, but that's the most viable avenue from a straight reading of the statute that I could think of. And it does seem natural that, a city might limit the intensity of a recreational vehicle park in that sort of circumstance. So, again, I can't say that that's been tested and that is for sure thing, but it seems at least a possibility from the language.
And a follow-up question would be, how clear is it, I haven't done my homework on 197493 to be honest. Does it say electricity and water and disposal? And
Yes.
if you theoretically take one of those away, then it's possible that the ORS does not apply anymore, I guess. Is that kind of what we're saying or we're trying to discuss?
Yes, so the requirement is lawfully connected to water and electrical supply systems and a sewage disposal system. So again, from a straight reading of the language here, if one of those elements were missing, it would suggest that that would open the door to preventing placement and or limiting the length of occupancy of an RV as a residential dwelling in an RV park.
Would an RV dump station be considered a sewage disposal system?
Um, again, I'm not sure that's been tested. Certainly the implication is what says if the recreational vehicle is lawfully connected, suggests to me that it's a physical connection to the vehicle itself rather than a communal disposal site.
Okay.
I have a question from Matt and maybe Garrett. Is there a similar type of state statute for hotels? I mean, I think, part of this issue is there's semantics. There are, in theory, two different kinds of RV parks. And, in that Venn diagram, they do overlap sometimes. We have the one on the east side of town that is kind of morphed into more of a permanent housing, which is zoned residential, oddly. And being this was, originally tourist commercial, obviously this isn't the intent for having any permanent, residence. It's, so I'm looking at it, trying to look at it more similarly to like a hotel. So, are there any rules, that either one of you know of in regards to hotels that you can't kick somebody out or, or that are similar? Because it seems like it just seems confusing. And I think the confusion is that, where RV park has two different connotations in our society.
Yeah, at least I'm not aware of any comparable provision for hotels. And, the statute that we're addressing, it deals with both manufactured dwelling parks and RV parks. And yes, I certainly understand that most people think those to be kind of sort of different uses, and it may make more sense in the one context than the other, but the statute is what it is.
Okay.
So the next being these last package of revisions was to add additional detail on how the proposed 65% lot area dedicated to RV park, how that's measured. And initial effort by staff was to identify the outermost perimeter of the RV park use, as well as any shared amenities that are in support and associated with the RV park use. In conversations with the applicant, to acknowledge and understand that some of those amenities may be located in proximity and some relative distance from the RV park, but still available and for use by RV park guests, so that could unnecessarily kind of increase the overall footprint of RV park and have unintended kind of consumption of that square footage for amenities that are still accessible, still on site, but maybe some distance away. So instead of requiring that those amenities will be counted, agree that it shall not be counted, but amenities will still be required, but not included in that outermost perimeter measurement.
Is that including paths and trails?
It would include, if that were amenity, that it would not be counted. And that's a good example, that the trails could be sprawling and encompass the entirety of the property. But not, I think the intent of the 65% lot coverage is to constrain the RVs and the related drive aisles and pads to a limited portion of the property, instead of being property line to property line RVs.
So instead of just having solid pavement for the 65%, you can break it all up and.
Correct.
That makes more sense.
Next being that to RV park required amenities, just reworded that and added that that the amenities be provided prior to or at the time of opening of the RV park, so that it's not deferred or left over, but rather that they are in place, either in association with another
separate use that's been developed, or at least as part of the RV park, if that's the only use of the property.
So I'm gonna press this just a little bit one more time. So I still cannot fathom, since we agree in our plans that we want trails and paths, and as you've said, there's a whole kind of landscaping requirements, no matter what this says. How is multi-use trails and paths an amenity? I mean, it seems to me that that should not be one of the two choices.
Well, I think if, because it's, 5-acre property, so if they wanted to put a path that went around the property,
Yeah.
that would be primarily for the use of the people visiting. I think that's what it's referring to. I mean,
Well, he just got through saying that it would help break up the internal part to keep the RV parts broken up, instead of having one big lump of 65 with a path all the way around it, you'd have paths in it and it'd be all landscaped. So that,
I think that there are design standards already in place for the commercial districts as a whole
right,
to have what you're talking about.
right, and that's why it shouldn't be an amenity.
Well, I think it could be above and beyond as amenity, as in addition to a standard amount of paths.
I mean, it would be for, I would think, the exclusive use of the visitors, and it would, I'm imagining it'd be interior, obviously, I think that there's code and there would, I mean, there already is.
Connectivity
But
code.
connectivity wise, there would be something along, the Camp Polk
Yeah.
Road.
So,
Okay.
and to provide some clarification here, that, and perhaps what you're getting at is that, we have a citywide goal of providing off-street network of trails that serve the community and connect
Right.
various regions. This idea and notion would be that you'd have some on-site trails that are, if it's an exercise trail or a meandering through the natural area or around and in proximity to one of the ponds or something like that. So
Or like going to the dog park.
correct. So just thinking about on-site, walking path versus those that are required or aspired for connectivity throughout the community.
Okay, so now what I hear you saying is that it wouldn't be a requirement to have multi-trails and paths because that would be on-site rather than a connectivity between areas. So I thought when we have developments, we have requirement to have trails within those developments. Whether it's within it or around it, that's part of the connectivity. So I think we're splitting hairs here when we say it is an amenity.
I
Master
think,
plan.
again, it's on top of what is already standardized in design standards. So it's,
If they choose it, they'd only need to choose two.
but there's not gonna be no paths on this property, whether it's an amenity or it's not an amenity. There will be paths on this property. There is open space requirements. There's all kinds of different design requirements that are necessary
Yeah,
to
you're
have.
saying what I'm saying, Mayor, is that we already have
No,
the requirement.
No,
Why-
no, I'm not. It's a chosen amenity.
Yes,
That's
I'm
all.
sorry. I guess I'm not understanding this, so we can move on because I don't.
I think you're
understand.
thinking about maybe more, large properties that are master planned, like, and with the neighborhood with paths through it. And this is gonna be a private property with, maybe a fence around it and there won't be paths going through it. It's just, ultimately, it's just a business. It's not a neighborhood. Is that maybe what you're thinking?
Although there was discussion of having amenities available to the entire community,
Exactly.
not just those within the park.
We can move on.
Okay, and then lastly, refining the definition of lodging facility. Originally proposed to add the same limit on the length of stay that was originally proposed as part of an RV park, to have it apply to lodging facilities, just for consistency between those short-term temporary accommodations. But as part of the removal of the occupancy limit on RV parks, it seems appropriate to remove that limitation from the lodging facilities. To your point, Councilor Lentz, I think at some point, any overnight accommodation that the duration of stay, you go from a temporary lodging use for a particular time. Once you get past, if it's 30 or 31 days, it would automatically, or at some point, become a residential, and other standards would come into play. So removing this duration of stay does not change what applicable standards would apply to a stay at a location.
Why did we change the reference park model recreation be able to park model manufactured dwellings? Because they are different things.
They're different things, and that was in error. I think originally park model RV was included as one of those examples of what those, and so our conclusion was they are recreational vehicles, which is also referenced. And so the idea was that saying recreational vehicle and park model recreational vehicle was redundant. But the further consideration of this park model manufactured home or manufactured dwelling, there's no such thing as a park model manufactured home.
You're removing that?
So as part of this latest revisions that we offer here tonight,
Looking there and not on the sheet of paper.
it is striking that park model manufactured dwelling from that.
I wasn't comfortable with that, but I am comfortable with this. So I know the difference.
And to kind of knowing that we've been presenting and there's interested applicant and public, just want to note that we've got a robust public engagement process, upwards of 6 meetings, including tonight with Planning Commission and City Council, as well as the applicant offered and voluntarily to conduct a neighborhood meeting in advance of submitting their application. Notices have been provided, both published in the Nugget, mailed to property owners within the district, and also emailed to participants of the process to date, and posted at City Hall and the post office just to get the word out. Also, media coverage includes articles and coverage in the Nugget, upwards of 6 articles to date, as well as mention in the Sisters Roundup newsletter. And to date, we've have in excess of 35 public comments that are included in the record and presented to you for consideration.
Quick question. The applicant's neighborhood meeting, when did that occur, and where the findings posted in the same place as the other information from city people?
So this would be separate from our requirements of notice for our public meetings that we have. That meeting was held in January. Notice was mailed to surrounding property owners of the district within 500 feet. And the applicant included a sign-in sheet of those that attended the meeting and a summary in the burden of proof, provided summary of what was discussed and the context of the conversation.
So that went to the planning commission, or where did that go? That information you just.
That was included in the application, so it's part of the record that's presented to both the planning commission and you.
To relook at it.
When there's a potential change in zoning or in language, typically that notice goes out to those within 500 feet. That's sort of a standard for the city. You mentioned 500 feet, so that's not a big radius given the size of the property. So is that something we normally is that normal process?
No, the 500 feet in this case was selected by the applicant at their by their choice. With legislative amendments, we're not required to provide mailed notice to surrounding property owners. So instead, we use the other processes, the posted notice, et cetera, to get the word out there. However, with a zone if a zone change or a amendment to the code could impact the value of properties within that district that are subject to those changes, we're required by state law to provide mailed notice of that, identified as Measure 56 notice, and that was provided the property owners within the district.
Thank you.
When you say property owners within the district, which district?
The tourist commercial district. So those 3 property owners were provided mailed notice.
And not anybody around them?
No, not required with legislative amendments, not required by our city's development code to provide that mailed notice to surrounding property owners.
Even though their value might go down.
It's the change to the code, and the properties that are specifically impacted by that change.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is that the finality of the staff report?
We'll just acknowledge that the planning commission, recommended approval of the amendments on a 4-2 vote. And,
But
I will.
not on this.
but not including the revisions that have taken place since the review. So those that were added after the workshop that we discussed here tonight. And I will leave it at that for the sake of time.
All right, well, I'm gonna get back to the script so I know where we're at. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. You know, obviously we're looking at this closely, right? So, next up is correspondence. Have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the agenda materials?
Yeah, 2 additional correspondence have been received. One from Charlie Stevens on behalf of Better Living and Sisters, and another from Ronnie Duff of the Three Sisters Historical Society. Those were provided in advance of tonight's meeting via email. I do have printed copies if you like.
I'd like a printed copy of the second one. I didn't get a chance to see that. Please.
I've read them both,
Me too.
That was an
which is amazing.
to that. Oh, thank you.
All right. Does anybody have any more questions for staff? We kind of did it as we were going along, so we got a little ahead of ourselves, I guess, but it's okay.
Well, that's why it took so much time.
That's right.
Their time to question, we deliberate later.
Yeah.
I had one question, more of a clerical thing, in the revised, chart where permitted uses, et cetera. At the bottom, there was kind of, a section of prohibited uses. Yet in the next column, each one of them had a P next to it, which I think might just be more of a clerical thing because it was a little confusing.
Correct.
It was
Yeah,
permitted to be prohibited.
it was when the formatting of the chapter was changed, that error was
Okay, I
carried.
just wanted to make sure that,
So we've got that slated for,
Okay.
some housekeeping amendments.
great, thank you.
Well, I also wanted to ask, the RV park standard, in the highway commercial zone, is that a permitted use, outright permitted use, or a conditional?
No, good question. It's a conditional use in the highway commercial district.
And so the thinking was that it should be a conditional use in highway commercial, which I think is somewhat envisioned to be more normal for an RV park. Why would it not be a conditional use in this zone, which is a little bit outside what most people would think a normal spot?
I think the notion there is that the district is so limited in its, the properties that could be developed with an RV park. And so any compatibility should be considered as part of this legislative process and include any specific development standards to address that compatibility. So versus in the highway commercial, you could have various locations that have different characteristics or considerations to discuss or look into compatibility.
So the conditions that are existing for the conditional use in the highway commercial zone, those things that would be considered in order to get the conditional use are already built into the standards for this zone?
That's the notion.
Okay.
And the idea also, again, that in the highway commercial, you may have a site that's located adjacent to, it could be just varying, a site that's up next to the highway and need special consideration versus one that's located farther back and adjacent to residential uses. So
we
the
know what
variation.
this is and what it is, and so we can.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on to the next section?
I'm ready to take.
Okay, at this time, we're gonna have the applicant give their presentation.
With an opportunity to have already heard our concerns.
Please be sure to get pretty close to those microphones so everybody can hear you.
And not on yet.
You have to hold the button. Yep.
We good?
Sounds
Great.
good. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council and staff. My name is John Skidmore. I'm a land use consultant here on behalf of Lake House Inn LLC. Ernie Larrabee, the owner, is sitting there. If you have any specific questions for him, I'm joined by Adam Smith. He is our land use attorney. And I'm going to try to keep our presentation short because what I just learned is you had a lot of questions about the specifics of the proposal. So I'll give you a little background on the whole Sun Ranch area, how it came together. I have an extensive history with the property. I was just thinking about it earlier. My son, my youngest boy, is going to be a sophomore at U of O this year. He was just born when I started working on the Sun Ranch project. So 20 years ago, we were looking at this whole, not only the tourist commercial zone, but what is now the North Sisters Business Park, and then the residential zone above that. A previous client of mine purchased that in 2003, I want to say 2002-ish. The Conklin Bed and Breakfast property was not in the city limits. We worked with the county and the city to expand the urban growth boundary to include this property into the urban growth boundary so we could do a better job of cohesively planning the Sun Ranch zone. I believe it was Councilor Blum who had a question about whether it was what it was previously zoned. I believe all the property within the UGB at that time, so 35 acres or so, was within a more traditional light industrial zoning district. And so we worked with city staff, we worked with planning commission, as well as city council over the course of probably 2 years to develop this master plan community that, as Matt mentioned, was to be more of that complete communities where you would have a residential area where people who might be working in the Sun Ranch Business Park could live there. And then you had this Sun Ranch Tourist Commercial Zone, which we looked at very precisely and limited the uses there so that it really had the effect of attracting both traveling tourists as well as maybe people from the business district who are doing business there and they need a place to stay, but also bringing members of the public to the property from the city of Sisters. So in about 2006, I want to say 7-ish, the old Conklin Bed and Breakfast property, my old client was working with a restaurant owner out of Portland or Seattle. Renovations began. Maybe this person kind of saw the Great Recession coming and fled the project, and it has sat there since. So that was 2000. I think it was finally adopted 2005, 2006. But it was always intended to be a community that worked together. A lot has changed since 2006, 2007. And we definitely tailored this zone to a pretty precise vision at the time, with cabins around the ponds. There was a limitation on those, but there was also this ability for lodging facilities in addition to that, and having an eating and drinking establishment there to pull in some interest from the locals as well. Since that time, we've had a Great Recession, we've had a pandemic. Sisters has grown from 1,700, I think, to about 3,800. And we've had a very, I'd say, a large change in terms of how people travel and how they engage in tourism. In the past 20 years, we've seen a 60% increase in RV ownership. We've seen the van life phenomenon that has really taken hold. And so when I was working with the current owner, Ernie, they had approached the city to ask if an RV park would fit within the lodging facility term. And as Matt had mentioned, it wasn't defined. And I think staff defensively said, well, we have that defined elsewhere. It's defined in the code. It's allowed elsewhere. So if it's a specific use, you need to call out the specific use in the zoning district. And if you want to do that, here's the path to follow through a text amendment. And as we continue to refine this vision, we really wanted to create something that was a boutique RV type park. And there was a lot of pushback from the Planning Commission on that term, but that was a term that we used in the Sun Ranch Business Park. At that time, when we proposed having living quarters in an industrial zone, that was crazy talk. When we proposed some more service commercial type uses and a very light industrial zone, knowing that you're not going to attract your traditional smokestack industrial to Sisters, I remember chatting with our friends from Edco about that and whether or not it was a very good idea. But it's something that really seemed to, I think, set the tone for that area. It's really developed into a very unique employment-based center. And we're looking to have something with a few more amenities in this RV park. So we've always been talking about a mixed use development on that site. That's why we have the 65% maximum lot coverage. The idea is that we'd have the remaining area for things like an eating and drinking establishment, maybe a small retail facility. I don't know, maybe you're selling bikes or something like this, but it was never intended to be a strip mall. It was never intended to be a gas station. The idea was always to focus on something special that brings locals and tourists alike to the property. So that is the general intent of the conversations we've had with staff for over a year now. So with that background, why don't I dive into kind of more the technical issues for a few minutes, and then we can start addressing some of the very specific questions that you have. The approval criteria, and as Matt did mention, I should say, that whole area of town was an applicant-driven, developer-driven zoning code and development. And so if we had stuck to what was on the books, you'd have a light industrial district up there and property in the county zoned exclusive farm use. So I think that the changes that we had made were based on market data and understanding the community. And I think that's something that Sisters has really benefited from. You have a lot of homegrown entrepreneurs, business owners, property owners, and developers who have created things that have really, I think, helped create the culture of Sisters. Five Pine, I worked with Bill Willits over the years, developing that master plan and bringing it through and going through various processes. And there were frustrating parts at time, but I think that's a great example of a local property owner with a great vision and idea and was willing to work through the process to realize it. Same with Sun Ranch. We worked on that for years. I think the barn is a super cool example of kind of a new spin on a commercial use in town. And so I would encourage everyone to embrace the history that Sisters has of local folks coming up with an idea and working with the community to refine it and then developing it. And really, from my experiences and from my observations, and my brother lives 5-minute walk that way, it's all those things have come and really contributed greatly to what Sisters has become. So with all of that said, the approval criteria that you have, and Matt briefly touched on it, really talk about consistency with state law, consistency with the comprehensive plan, the adequacy of public facilities, and you even call out on top of that, consistency with the transportation planning rule. Went through in very great detail. It's in the staff report. It's in what we submitted. I think we demonstrated consistency with state law. Excuse me. One of the bigger deals from your comp plan and state law relates to goal 8, which is economic development. You have comprehensive policies, and your economic opportunities analysis has policies related to continued focus on tourism to continue to bring people here to spend money locally. So we definitely focused on that. We focused on the changing nature of travelers with a 60% increase in RV ownership in the past 20 years. There was a survey commissioned by the city related to tourist experiences. And one of the interesting comments that was provided when I think it was the second most stated comment was there was concern about the high cost of lodging in Sisters, and that either prevented people from staying here and spending more money. And if you look at those types of studies, folks who come and do a day trip spend, call it $100. People who come and stay overnight, 100 times something, maybe it's twice, maybe it's 2.5. I forget exactly what it is. But the high cost of lodging, and we did a real brief study here in Sisters last summer, and I think the cheapest place you could stay was for just a small, standard room with one bed was like almost $300 a night. And so the other idea behind this RV potential or a hostel potential is to address a lower price point of lodging that could appeal to people who want to come here, stay here in a nice amenitized RV park and go to the quilt show, go to the music festival that was just here, those types of things. So that was a focus of ours. And then in terms of consistency with it or adequacy of public facilities, your water master plan, your sewer master plan, all have assumed a commercial development at a higher intensity than what we're proposing, but you've got the sewer and water plans to do that. I think there's going to be a small water connection on Camp Polk at some point, but it's in the plan. We demonstrated consistency with the transportation system plan. Actually, the traffic generated by the uses that were proposed will not, I forget the specific term, but adversely impact or deteriorate the ability for the transportation system to deliver. Obviously, if something is specifically proposed for the property, there would be a transportation analysis to go along with it. But we did not exceed the abilities of Camp Polk or Barkley or the connecting roads. And I think those two are both collectors. So that is the really the more technical what's in the approval criteria. But all of these tweaks that we have been talking about have really been aimed at addressing issues that were raised by the public or by the Planning Commission. And that 65% lot coverage was one way to kind of assure a mixed use development versus I think that property is 4.6 acres versus a 4.6 acre RV park. That's not what we're looking to do. The amenities that are provided, those would be open to the public because we were talking quite seriously about a dog park in the RPZ area because you can't really put any structures, potentially a pickleball court, maybe a small little stage, maybe an area with fire pits and those types of things that are going to attract my brother to go over and have a beer and a burger and listen to someone playing the guitar or go play some pickleball. But it's also something that would be pretty cool if you pull into an RV park and you're like, wow, look at this. We got food carts. We have a little pub. We can go play some pickleball. Oh, and we can walk down to the quilt show. So that was always the intent. And I appreciate working with staff on putting something in there that assures that mixed use component. With that, we could go through, I should put my glasses on. The multi-use trail. That concept was the standards for the commercial to develop this property with an RV park or other overnight accommodations and other uses on there. There would be required pedestrian facilities on that on Camp Polk. And speaking with Mr. Bertagna, there's going to be a required multi-use trail that would go up Camp Polk. I know with the East Barkley Road reconstruction, there will be some enhanced bike and pedestrian facilities along there as well. The idea for the multi-use trails through the property would be, it's something that kind of meanders around it, maybe goes around the ponds. The RPZ covers the lot 2, which is kind of northwest. That is Dutch Pacific owned. There was conversations about connecting with that owner and seeing if we could put a multi-use trail from there that would connect up to the industrial district. So maybe you'd have a little, I think we've all seen the trails where you can stop and do some pull-ups or push-ups. And it was that type of an idea that we were thinking through. We had initially proposed park use, I think, as part of the approvable uses. to capture that idea of these various items that could be proposed. And one of the planning commissioners had a very good thought, like, well, geez, you could, public swimming pool could be, you know, a park use, or you could have a very intensive, active recreation facility there. And that's not what we were looking for. It was something really to complement and fit the scale of what we were proposing for the site, but also bring in Sisters residents. To Commissioner or Councilor Letz's point, prohibited uses in a zoning code is always something that is kind of like nails on the chalkboard. If you have a list of permitted uses, I've always been curious as to why you have a list of prohibited uses. If it's not listed in the permitted uses, I don't think you need the prohibited uses as well. But when we initially were doing this, that was kind of more how the city was doing things at the time. And the idea for not having auto dependent uses, never wanted to have a gas station, never wanted to have, you know, that type of auto servicing facility. It always was geared at being, you know, overnight accommodations and uses that would appeal to the locals. So with that, we're happy to answer questions. Adam, I don't know if you have any items you want to address related to ORS 197-493 or anything along those lines.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on just a couple of comments. Adam Smith, I'm a land use attorney with Shelby Williamson White. For the record, my address is 360 Southwest Bond Street, Bend, Oregon, 97702. John did a great job laying things out. I just wanted to highlight a couple of those points again. You know, first, I just wanted to reiterate that, you know, a lot of these tweaks and a lot of the changes as we've gone through this process are demonstrative of our client's intention for this to really be a collaborative process. The very fact that our client is proposing the legislative text amendment is because the intent is for it to be a very collaborative process. As John noted, there's probably some reasonable you know, discussion on whether or not lodging facilities in the existing code would even include the RV park use and some of the things that our clients are ultimately hoping to do. But rather than having a more adversarial argument fight about the issue, it seemed, hey, let's take the opportunity to clean up the code. Let's have a collaborative process and you know, consultation with the city. That intent is continued throughout these entire proceedings. When we've heard concerns from the public, there were concerns expressed in front of the Planning Commission that, hey, we don't want this use to morph into something more akin to a manufactured home park. That's when, okay, let's respond. Let's work through these kinds of issues. Again, I just really wanted to highlight our interest has always been to be very collaborative from the start. And it's with that spirit that we'll answer any questions and work with City Council. I mean, ultimately, both staff and the applicant, we have to let go of this work product and let it be your work product. And in that interest, we're here to answer questions and to continue collaborating with you all. The second, to just highlight, you know, John's note that it's really about the decision criteria and following the decision criteria. I mean, the Planning Commission recommended 4-2 the approval of this project. And, you know, at the end of the day, there are guidelines that kind of guide the City Council's consideration. And it comes down to what are those decision criteria. And I note that just to respond to some of the questions and the conversation that was already occurring when Matt was providing his staff report, you know, when it comes to, you know, I think a lot of these issues can really, the touchstone, we can return back to is, you know, what is consistent with the intent of the code? What is the intent of this, honestly, a pretty unique zone? I mean, this is a pretty creative zone in which we're trying to attract both tourism and amenities for the locals. I mean, those are two different things, and trying to figure out how to stay consistent always with the intent of that code. And I think that kind of can help answer some of the questions and the issues that the city councilor was talking about. So what do I mean by that? Turning to, you know, ORS 197-493, the reason why we ended up with occupancy limits coming off of the Planning Commission's consideration was, again, there was some concerns about, you know, any use there morphing into something more aligned with a manufactured park. And then there was concerns, well, oh, is that going to run afoul of that state statute? And so Staff recommended some tweaks to the code, and we came back and said, we could just delete that. The intent of this zone, again, what is the intent of the zone, is to provide tourism, lodging for tourism, right? It's not to provide permanent housing. And ORS 197493 only comes into play if a recreational vehicle is being used for a residential dwelling or as a residential dwelling. If it is being used, I would say, as a temporary dwelling for tourism, I don't think ORS 197493 comes into play at all. So to the specific concern or the specific conversation about, well, maybe we limit some of the utilities, you know, that can have a market impact on any future use in that particular zone. And instead, I would encourage that we just say plainly what we mean in the code. And if the concern is that we don't want, you know, whether it be RVs or any other lodging facility to morph into, you know, permanent residential dwelling, you could just state that directly in the code. You know, except for the caretaker unit, no lodging facility or RV shall be used for permanent residential dwellings and shall instead only be used for temporary housing for tourism, something to that effect. And I think that would get right at the heart of the issue and then also ensures that ORS 197493 doesn't become an issue. Similarly, you know, when it comes to the amenities, and John already noted that, I'll just piggyback on his comments. You know, the intent of the zone, I think, requires those amenities to be provided to the Sisters community as a whole and to the tourism component. Again, we can just state that plainly in the code, and all recreational amenities shall be open to the public at large, or something to that effect. The issue that we were running into is that we just want to make sure we're not, that the 65% limit is not counting against the RV park, right? Like that's the only concern that we had, that if these amenities are, of course, being provided, being required even, those shouldn't be then counted against the space requirement for the RV park. Again, I think a pretty easy way to address it is just plainly put in the code that the recreational amenities shall be open to the public at large. That's really, as I said, I just wanted to address some of the comments and then reiterate some of the information that John already provided. With that, I'm sure you'll hear from members of the public, and I think we'll reserve the rest of our time for rebuttal.
Okay. And it,
Of course, if you have questions.
let me,
Sure.
let me add one last item and then happy to answer questions. And you know, this idea about creating a space that attracts tourists plus locals, the EOA, your economic opportunity analysis explains that uses that attract tourists provide desired amenities for locals as well. And so that was always kind of a driving mission, or driving guidelines in terms of how we put this together and why we were talking about these various amenities. So if you think about the cool places that you like to visit, so typically you'd like to have those in your town, right? So that was the idea behind that.
Okay.
Given that we are way behind schedule, I would like to have some conversation about how we proceed tonight, whether we continue to a later date, whether we carry on or whatever, because I'm going to be needing to make some notification about my length of time here.
Well, I'd like to try and get through the questions of the applicants since they're here and the public's here. So if we could do those things, and then when we get to the part of the script where we close or continue with the hearing, we can certainly, it's.
The questions back and forth before that.
So this next part is questions to the applicant, then there's public testimony. Then there's applicant rebuttal. And then, no, I have the script. So the applicant rebuttal, and then we have further questions from the council of clarification of the applicant, and then we close or continue the hearing before we do deliberations.
So you'd like to go to close or continue the hearing?
Yeah, I think so. It may be another half an hour or so, maybe more.
Maybe more. Okay, so I need a break.
Yeah, that'd be
We
great.
need a break and we will kind of say 9:30. What then transpires with our URA meeting?
Well, that's a really short meeting, it's just consent agenda item. One thing to consider as we get to this point, is there is continuation, we're not meeting. We're not meeting again, this month, and so we might have to consider a special meeting. If we want to continue it to another date certain in July or wait until August.
Yeah,
I know people have travel plans and
Are
everything.
we on a clock?
No, this is a
Legislative.
I think that that's not as, that's pretty low on the priorities about when the next meeting would be, honestly. I think we had to think about tonight. But one of the things I want to think about is you guys have been here for many hours and you guys are here. So I think if we can get down, if we get really close, we'll try and wrap it up and at least get to that part where we close or continue the hearing and we can have a short discussion before that to decide what we're gonna do.
Okay.
But I'm gonna assume that this is a very complex issue and that we probably won't finish tonight. I think that's fair to say. I'm not trying to speed anybody along or slow anybody.
A suggestion, Mr. Mayor, we do have a place where we say questions of the applicant. However, we also have that after we hear public testimony, we have another opportunity for questions of the applicant. I'm comfortable with holding my questions until step number 13.
Okay.
Which is on the next page, in order to allow the folks that are here from the public to have a chance to have their say. If that's comfortable for the folks at the table.
No objection on our part and Mr. May, if I can be heard on the broader question. We, at least the applicant, we will be here whenever you need us. But our sincere request is if we can hopefully get to the close of the record tonight. We've been working on this for a very long period of time, but I fully appreciate that the counselors and the mayor may require some time to contemplate, to think through these issues and come back and deliberate at the.
Well, we can close it and meet again or continue it and meet again, and we can talk about that when we get there. Just because we close or continue doesn't mean that we can't do either one of them at a future date. Correct?
But yeah, they're requesting that the record be closed.
They're requesting the record be closed and we'll figure that out when we get through this next part. Do you want to take a 5-minute break?
Yes, please.
We're gonna take a 5-minute break. Nothing's changing. Just keep it running, I guess. I don't. Okay, just about 5 minutes, just so people can use the restroom and make phone calls or arrangements if they have to. Okay, so if you're looking at the script, we're gonna skip number 9. We can ask questions after the public. I really want to give the public an opportunity. So, public testimony. We will now invite members of the audience to provide testimony.
Mike's.
That's okay. Little buzz.
When your name is called, please come forward and state your name and address for the record before proceeding with your testimony. For those attending via Zoom, we will conduct a roll call to see who wants to provide testimony at the conclusion of testimony by those attending here in person. We will begin with proponents of the proposal. Does anyone have signed in sheets being a proponent supporting the proposal?
I am not clear if any of these are proponents.
Is anybody here to support?
David Bechtel, are you a proponent? King.
Stephen King, are you a proponent? Would you like to come up and provide public testimony? Okay. Try this again.
Welcome back, sir.
Please state your name and address.
Is this on?
Yeah, that one right there. Yep.
Hello, my name's Stephen King. I live at 15185 Windigo Trail, Sisters, Oregon, 97759. Is that good? So for the record, I'd like to congratulate the English soccer team for their victory today against the Netherlands. And they're going to the final of the Euros. And I think that's a significant event. So thank you.
Yeah.
You may have guessed by that comment that I'm not from around here. And whilst I may not be around here, I've chosen to live in Sisters and I've been here just over 30 years now. So I'm not really going anywhere else. And I love it because there's no people, frankly. When you live in a population of many millions, it's nice to be somewhere where there's space. So congratulations on protecting that for all of us. When I first came here, I moved here. My next door neighbor was a guy called Ted Eady. And Ted Eady, for those of you know, he owns the cinema in Redmond and a bunch of stuff now. But he bought what's the Barclay Ranch. And he bought that ranch and then turned it into commercial. And he used to have a saying, he would tell me basically in his own favor, really, that he turned dollar per acre into dollar per foot. And since that time, and this goes back to Gary's point, or sorry, Councillor Ross's point about, you know, heritage of previous boards. Since that time, there's a post office, there's a brewery, there's a distillery, you know, there's not a bordello or anything, but there's at least 2, drinking establishments. There's light industrial. There's a whole bunch of different stuff, storage units, whole bunch of stuff that's gone in there, right? In my entire time talking to Ted at that time, he never said there's an exclusion for RV parks. This whole area, going back 30 years, was designated to be commercial. Subsequently been rezoned into light industrial. There was a variance for residences. Some of you may even remember that. There was a whole fight about density at that time, right? There was a variance for residences. And so in a sense, it's the residences that have come into this zone later in a sort of historical context. So anybody buying a house next to a light industrial, the North Sisters Industrial Park, should be aware that industrial things, commercial activities are going to take place near them. Doesn't that make sense from a 30-year precedent that this was a commercial area for Sisters? So that's one thing. Second thing I'd like to say is the Barclay Ranch was a 2,000-acre ranch on the outside of Sisters. It was timber and it was ranching. Why is that important? Because that's our heritage. It's probably your heritage more than mine, but that's our heritage. And that house is probably as significant as the saloon and the schoolhouse, right? The administration building, and should be protected. And we should all feel kind of ashamed of ourselves that since 2010, that thing's been falling apart. And what I have advocated for with Ernie is that we should protect that. It would be great if we could also protect those lakes and make a use out of it, rather than let it continue to rot on our watch. I think that's kind of a little bit shameful, frankly. So my personal agenda is to save that Barclay. I know it's called the Conklin House, but that was a bed and breakfast. I got one more thing. I see you looking. One more quick thing, which is that I think you should also consider as a board what happens if you choose not to approve this, right? Ernie will sell it to somebody else. He's looked at all his personal options. He can't make money at any others. So he'll sell it to somebody else. And most likely the proposal will look a lot like what happened behind Dakotas, where we have a beautiful view and an incredibly dense development, in my opinion. All those ponds will get taken out. That house will get torn down and you'll have a really dense, not on your watch, Gary, but in the future, you'll just have a really dense residential development because that's all that's going to make sense on that size lot with that size money. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. I would say that was an opponent of the proposal, but that's okay. I said proponent, but that's pretty close. Sounds very close. Let's go ahead. Yeah.
I think he's opposing.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
David Bechtel.
Sorry, I misconstrued that. Yeah, gotcha. Yes, please.
David Bechtel, 1310 West Hill Avenue, Sisters. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on getting this far, listening to this. this is my fourth time through this, and so I'm pretty exhausted, and if I stop making sense, it's not because I don't generally, but it's been a little tough evening. I guess I'll start out, I was never gonna say this, but I will. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. And we're here talking about development codes and we're listening to people talk about, we're gonna do what do you want to call it? High-end, RV park or whatever. But, we don't want to have any specific standards for that because, oh, we might be committed to something. Well, you don't know that they're going to build a high-end park or whether, since that property is currently listed for sale, somebody else will. And you have no assurance at all that what they're talking about is going to happen. What matters is what's in the verbiage in the code. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Just look at everything and be careful about what you're doing and don't do something that will get you in trouble later. Having said that, I've been opposed to RV park in the tourist commercial district. However, I would be more supportive if it were allowed as a conditional use with well-considered approval criteria developed with community input instead of basically no substantial criteria, not even those adopted by the county. This was suggested by citizens prior to the Planning Commission hearing and was also suggested in that hearing as an option by the planning staff. However, since it was not considered seriously earlier, no alternative criteria were offered to the Planning Commission by staff, and the proposal would have needed to be sent back to the staff to develop them. The commission chair stated that, in his opinion, a commercial zone is a commercial zone, and a property owner ought to be able to develop anything in any commercial zone in the city, even if the use is allowed in just one. It's your planning commissioner. Otherwise, it would be unfair to the property owner where additional restrictions would apply. He then pressed for a vote as 4 of the 6 members were suggesting support for the conditional use concept. What was left out of the chairman's discussion was the fact that the RV park use is not currently allowed in the tourist commercial zone. So the addition of that use would be granting of a property right that does not currently exist. Additionally, there were dozens of homeowners nearby who purchased property recently in that area where an RV park is not allowed. Is this fair to them? Does this encourage public participation? I think not. And I've given a copy of this to the recorder. I've included a reference to the last Planning Commission hearing video. And so you don't have to watch all 2 hours of it. I've given you the time when those statements were made. And it's come to my attention since I did this that also there was not time allowed for discussion after the motion for a vote. So there.
Thank you for your comments.
Now you know.
All right.
Ronnie Duff and Diane Prescott.
Can you hear me okay? My name is Ronnie Duff, and this is Diane Prescott. We are on the board of directors of the Three Sisters Historical Society, and we oppose this approval of this text amendment solely for the house. The house does have some significant history, as we have talked about, and I have outlined a little more in the letter. But we just believe that the approval of this text amendments as it stands now will be a death sentence for that house, and we feel like it deserves more. It was built in 47, I believe, but in the 40s. It's, to me, comparatively not that old, but to some people. But the history of it, the third schoolhouse that stood practically where we are all now, was moved there in 1912, and some of that building is inside that house. And we who believe in the history of this town and the importance think that is something that we should not just disregard and knock down. We should investigate further and see what we can do to save that. We feel like it probably would be a good tourism attraction. I've heard the name tourism mentioned, the word tourism mentioned several times, and I do believe that this is one special house that we should save and not continue to be eliminating houses because they're not convenient for a new project. It's valuable to the community now, to many of the people that we meet who come into the museum. They respect our history here in this town. And it may not be the only thing they come for. They may come to drink and eat, but people come to this town for our history. So I think it's valuable. It can continue to be valuable for tourism and the economy. We are in a building, our museum's in a building that was repurposed, which Diane might want to say something about.
It's built in 39. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It was opened in 39. Oh, not near the microphone.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
It was opened in 1939, has been in use except for a brief period when it fell into disrepair. The land underneath it, when it was over on Cascade, was sold. It was moved. Got some great pictures of the move of it in 1980. In 90, when the new library was built, it went vacant. There was a prior historical group that raised a significant amount of funds and restored it. They just felt that it was going to be raised, and they felt it is too important. It is a part of our history. We don't have that many important historical buildings here, and we should make an effort to save, and there are funds available through the Roundhouse, through the Ford Foundation. Look at what they're doing up at the San Am Ski Lodge. I mean, things can be saved. To me, when they want to put in a market, wouldn't that be ideal? That space could be a meeting space. It could be place for chess tournaments. It could be space for movies. You know, it could be useful in an RV park setting. We're not against the RV park, but we just hope that people appreciate the value. We give downtown landmark walking tours. People are thrilled to hear about the history of our town. There are people that travel just to see history, and it's important to us. It is part of the tourism economy and what brings people here, and it's important to us. We give, school children tours. We're doing an event for them at the SPRD very soon. It's just, we need our history. It is important to who we are. It has a great deal of value in itself, but having buildings that reflect that, and there aren't that many left. So we just like to recommend that the consideration be given. We realize that you don't have ownership of it, you don't have control over its use, but we just felt that it was important to speak up and share our views on it. That's what we're here for, to encourage historic preservation.
We appreciate it. Thank you. How many more do we have, if I can just check in with you?
One more.
Okay. I'm just doing it for the sake of time, talking a little bit.
Charlie Stevens.
Charlie, just so you know, everybody's been about 3 minutes.
Oh, I won't take it.
Okay. We did get your email today, so.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Charlie Stevens, 1086 West Collier Glacier Drive here in Sisters. We've got a lot of stuff on the record. I hope some of you have had a chance to read it. I'm not going to go into detail here. It's been a real struggle in this process. I could use a C word about it that I won't, but it's been confusing. It has been hard just to keep up with the proposals, which changed in one case drastically from hearing to hearing and meeting to meeting. And again, tonight, as you see, there's stuff that has changed since June 26th, 2 weeks ago. That's the way it's been all the way through this process. What you've got is you have a proposal for RV parks included in here with no criteria whatsoever, no design standards, no meaningful design standards whatsoever, should a proposal for an RV park come to you. 4 of the planning commissioners were concerned about that. 2 of them enough concerned that they voted against the proposal. And one of them wrote you a nice dissent email, which we very much agree with. But the fact is, if you get a proposal, there are no standards for you to hold them to. There are no off-street parking standards. The ones they refer to don't exist in section 3.3 of the code. There's some detail on that in there. The ones that they've offered, the three that they've offered, are not meaningful. One of them isn't even enforceable, even if it's legal, according to 197-493. Another thing in your code existing right now is that RVs are not legally allowed to be used for a short-term rental in Sisters. Section 2.15.2700D, as in dog. So the fact is that this proposal has been scattered and haphazard with changing things all the way along. But what you've got, we put in our comments that you got apparently from Monday, a list of the criteria that the city of Sutherland uses for RV parks. Now, we're not saying that you should adopt all of those standards, but we're saying that somebody in the city should have had a conversation about all those things, like pavement width, like turn radius, like parking spaces per RV unit spot. You'll notice that the setbacks in those standards in Sutherland look a lot more like the setbacks that are currently in the code for that property today. So there's a lot of stuff that should have been discussed so that when we get a proposal for an RV park, which we're inevitably going to get, there are some sort of criteria by which to judge it. There are none that are meaningful right now. And the current code, quite frankly, is quite good. I don't know who drafted it up, but I think the current code offers a lot to the city of Sisters. We kind of like it the way it is. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Sure. All right. Is there anybody online?
If there's anyone on Zoom who wishes to speak, could you please raise your hand? Let's see, none.
Okay, and we always give people one last chance. If you haven't spoken, even if you haven't turned in a sheet, you are allowed to speak if you'd like to. Okay. All right, thank you. I'm going to call the applicants back up so they can have a chance to, an opportunity to talk about some of the things they've heard from the public. Please don't forget to turn on your microphone. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we're going to get a shot at you. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way.
So Mayor, would you like us to respond to comments first?
It's up to you.
Okay.
Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and respond to anything you'd like to, if you'd like to clarify any of the information that you heard, or you want to, say whatever you want to say.
Take it away.
Yeah, I'm once again, Adam Smith for the record. I'm happy to comment to just a couple of things to the things that I noted. Mr. Bechtel's comments about how the planning commission made their decision. I would encourage you to go and watch the planning commission's deliberations. I think they struggle with the issues and their conversation was very robust and, reflective of their, understanding of the unique issues in the zone and what the applicant's trying to do. And I think they came to a pretty good decision. I would encourage you to review those proceedings directly, not just sections of them, review the whole thing. Comments from the Historical Society, with respect, I think we all understand and respect their concerns, but technically I think they're irrelevant to these proceedings. Nothing in the proposed amendments will have anything to do with the preservation of the existing structure. Nothing in the current code dictates the preservation of the current structure. The likelihood, the ability to preserve that current structure will occur regardless of these text amendments going through because of other economic factors. Again, nothing that's being proposed will have any negative or positive impact on the preservation of the structure. And I guess to the last commenter. I understand that things have shifted and changed. I personally apologize if that's been confusing to members of the public. As I noted before, our interest has been to be collaborative from the start. We initially proposed a much more robust text amendment because we were working with staff to do some code cleanup. There was a number of things that were initially proposed that were not applicant initiated. Although this was a applicant initiated text amendment, and working with staff, they encouraged us to clean up the code language and make it more consistent with other chapters. That wasn't as well received from the planning commission, and so we pivoted. And again, when people have raised concerns, we've tried to address those concerns. Even most recently, the amendments that were being proposed tonight, that was in response to staff proposing some tweaks to the code following your work session. So I understand those concerns, but I don't think they should necessarily be laid at the applicant's feet. I don't think they should be laid at anybody's feet. This is legislation. It is a robust conversation. When legislation goes through without any tweaks, that's because people are not paying attention. When people are paying attention and when we are respecting goal 1 of Oregon statewide planning goals and there's robust public participation, it leads to tweaks and changes in the code. And then the last thing I'll say on behalf of John, the kudos to whoever drafted the initial code. Well, that was John. So John wrote the current code language. And
For better or for worse.
and as he noted in our initial presentation, we are here because, we should never, whenever we're adopting legislation, we should never let perfection be the enemy of the good, or you'll never get any legislation done. Legislation is a code law is a living, breathing document that needs to be amended and changed with the times. And I think John already did an outstanding job noting why there have been some change in circumstances in the decade plus since he wrote that code language and the city adopted it that necessitate taking a closer look at it now. If for no other reason, the property's vacant for good reason. We can, if the city wants that property to be utilized, then I think we need to take a step back and ask why it hasn't been utilized since that code was first put in place, and how can we amend the code to make the property have some better potential for uses going forward.
And one other item I would address about the lack of standards for RV parks. You do have a robust section in 2.15/1700 that has standards. RV pad surfaces, roadways shall not be less than 30 feet in width if parking is permitted on the margin, not less than 20 feet if parking is not permitted. Driveways shall be no closer than 150 feet from the intersection of public streets, trash receptacles, parking, restrooms, screening. So there are standards that really direct and regulate how these would be developed. And then we proposed some additional on top, including the 65% lot coverage, the requirement of amenities, et cetera, et cetera. So just respectfully pushing back on that claim that there are no standards when in fact there are.
Okay, does that conclude your?
I believe so.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're gonna try and have some time for us to ask questions. Who wants to go first?
I don't have any more questions.
Okay, Gary?
Formulating them in my weak and feeble brain.
You got a couple?
I have a clarification, I think, to address your earlier comment about defining an RV as a permanent, dwelling or something like that. I mean, there are people who have $1 million motor coaches and that is their house, so and they don't have a permanent address. So I think I understood that, I just think that there's a couple of loopholes in there that might not be very watertight. So just want to throw that out there.
Well, it certainly is not the intent of this zone to allow somebody in $1 million RV or even a much cheaper RV to live there permanently as if that is their or as if that is their permanent home. The intent of this zone and the intent of what we're trying to capture is, providing lodging, temporary lodging for tourists. And my broader point was more to the, rather than trying to regulate around it, we should just say it directly. Because there will be unintended consequences to limiting, not allowing septic systems, for example, to just make sure that the statutory code provision doesn't apply, so then the occupancy limits can apply. We can more directly just get at that issue.
Can I follow up to that?
Go right ahead.
I think that I just want to make sure I hear you correctly on today's changes. In paragraph D, for the purposes of the Sun Ranch Tourist Commercial Zone, lodging facility means any building, structure, or improvement used to provide temporary sleeping accommodations for the public. And then it also mentions temporary occupancy at the end of that paragraph. So it's your position as as a land use attorney that fundamentally makes ORS 197493 not applicable to this particular zone. Is that correct?
Close. This language is in response to defining the term lodging facilities.
Okay,
RV parks are a separate, proposed to be a separate use category in the zone.
okay,
The reason we arrived at that is because there was some disagreement on whether or not RV parks should be considered a lodging facility or not. RV parks are called out as a separate use in other parts of sister zones. We said, fine, then we'll add them as an RV or as a separate use in this code. I would propose, if that was city council's point of view, that you want to make sure that these, that there are not permanent housing on this property or in this zone, that we include something similar to RV parks. Does that make sense?
so you, such as saying, just using the word temporary occupancy in line 1 instead of saying 30 days in a 90-day period or something like that.
Yes,
And just keep it kind of plain and simple,
plain and simple and
temporary
direct.
occupancy.
Our client's concern with a 30-day occupancy limit is it takes flexibility away, and they would like to be able to provide, opportunities for somebody to come and stay seasonally. I will note that whether you're staying in a hotel or staying in an RV park, once you stay for too long, you start to invoke landlord-tenant laws and regulations and issues. And I think for numerous reasons, our clients are not interested in something like that. So there's 30 days is, I mean, it's maybe too short of a period of time and takes away some flexibility, but certainly they're not looking to provide permanent lodging.
Is Garrett still on the line? And is it appropriate to talk to him now, or should I just finish up with the applicants and then talk to him separately? I think we'll finish up with you first. Questions?
Well,
I did, if a group of individuals from the community came to you, your owners, with a proposal to move the Conklin house, would there be any reason why they would not be amenable to do so?
I will answer the best I can and then invite my client if he wants to come and speak to this as well. Our clients have been exploring opportunities for quite some time to try and figure out if it's financially sustainable or financially doable to preserve the Conklin house. It's an existing location. We have no development proposal in front of the city at this time. We are, we have some aspirational ideas and thoughts, but nothing is concrete. Nothing's been planned. So I think they are equally as self-interested as any other member in this room to try and preserve the Conklin house. If that can be done on their property economically or move somewhere else, I don't think they would be opposed to that concept at all. I think they, again, to reiterate, they equally would like to see the house preserved. It's just a question of if it is financially feasible to do so. It is in substantial disrepair in its current state and will take a lot of money to save it.
I
And
understand.
anything
Any
to
other
add?
questions?
Yeah, I have questions.
Yeah.
And I've got a, yeah, I know, he asked a question. Go ahead.
I trust that our client will come up and join us if need be, but I think if he does not, I think that's an indication that I accurately answered the question for him.
So I think this question is actually for our attorney online, and while you're here to answer or give me more information. And that is, I still, the sticker for me is still ORS 197493. I think that no matter how we try to work our way around it, the code ORS 4, if you read it at the state legislative site or the ORS site, it starts off very specific. It follows with an extremely ambiguous statement at the end, allowing some degree of flexibility to the city to do such and such and such. It's not whether or not I like the idea of a boutique RV park. I think that it may not work as well as you think it does as an RV owner, but that's me. And I've been in a lot of them. But that's a business thing, nothing to do with me. I am concerned though about not putting this city in the position where if this entity, if this endeavor fails or changes hands, that doesn't become a permanent resident RV park. That's my concern. And I'm wondering if, based on the discussion you've heard earlier, if I'm asking now, our attorney, if my concern is valid.
Certainly, there's at least some validity here. I mean, the problem is it's, you know, clearly not the best drafted statute, and it's clearly a little ambiguous in some respects. So I do think there is certainly a stronger case to make it inapplicable if there is just outright prohibitions stated in the code for residential uses. But I still, just because of the ambiguity that exists and, you know, certainly shifts at the state levels in terms of priority for housing, you know, is it going to be viewed absolutely in that manner? You know, that's where I'm still have some reservations.
I do too. Thank you. And for the same reasons, I might add.
Councilor Ross, may I respond as
Of
well?
course, go ahead. That's actually what you had to say.
You know, interestingly, our client's interests and the city's interests, I think, are 100% aligned. What you are trying to ensure doesn't happen is also not our interest and what we're trying to achieve as well. So I think we are amenable to any creative solutions that anybody can come up with to ensure that this does not become permanent housing. That is not our intent. Our only comment, you know, is to do whatever, however we craft those limitations, that we do so with an eye towards providing flexibility for our clients if they proceed ultimately with an application to be able to, you know, make a go of it economically.
Right.
That's the end of it. So
And-
30 days is pretty restrictive when people may come in seasonally, but you know, aside from that comment, then yeah, let's
Well,
get creative and figure out a
In my
way to make
experience
this work.
with seasonal RV parks, quite frankly, is people tend to rent that same space every year for the season. And then you start to get amenities going onto the site that the renter wants to have. So it gets tricky. And having lived that lifestyle for 25, 30 years and having parents that lived it for 45 years, I've seen it work well and I've seen it not work well. And I've seen it work in areas where they have RV parks to beat code and they become permanent residents. So, and that's Florida. Don't even worry about us. But my point, I guess, is that I'm trying to figure out how, assuming it doesn't work for your client, we've now changed the code to make it work for your client, but he can't pencil it out financially. And then down the road, somebody drives another bus into it like we had with the gas station. And you weren't a part of that discussion, but the point is nice, good things were done to the code to try to help out, do some improving in the town, but they were nebulous enough that someone was able to figure a way around and use it, really exploit the code to their advantage. And we had a very contentious situation, and I don't want to do that again if I don't have to. So that's my concern, not the quality of the proposal, but we are talking about code amendments, and code amendments have ramifications, and code amendments don't go away once the applicant decides not to do it, or the applicant does decide to do it. That's my concern. And so that's one, and then.
Good, and may I respond to that? Which I appreciate, the unintended consequences concern is always at the forefront of these policy conversations. But I'd also encourage you to think about the successes that you've had locally with Sun Ranch, where again, we had some of these very same conversations where people were like, what is going to happen if you sell it? What about these residential districts? What about what about the Sun Ranch Industrial District? How is that going to look? Five Pine with its master plan. What is this whole new spin on the Western design theme? All of these things, it does take a little bit of a trust, But I think if you build your code with the intent so that you are looking at a limited duration stay, however we phrase that, I think it provides a protection, but always going to the worst case scenario in a town that's had a lot of best case scenarios work very well for it. I would encourage you to perhaps think through it in that manner as well.
Well, and I appreciate that statement. I don't think that's, I think that we need to look at what we're proposing for the site. And I think we need to look at what changes that means to that particular zone. And I'm not sure that this is the best decision for this particular zone. I'd love to see something on it. I mean, I'm not saying no, but my point is that I'm not comfortable that your assurances make me comfortable. So you have to understand.
Which I appreciate. I also think looking at the zone with the name tourist commercial, and you think about who travels in RVs, tends to be tourists. And so I think by explaining the intent of the zone, explaining that the limited duration, if something started going a little haywire, you do have a code enforcement action and you have a legislative record and zoning district to rely on if you needed to pursue something. Worst case scenario.
Well, I think the concern is more defensive in the sense that if we put something temporary in this new zone, that this ORS could be used against us and they would turn it into a long-term housing project. And that's a concern of mine, but I also, frankly, have, in previous decisions that we've made, and I'm thinking of the shelter especially, have somewhat enjoyed thumbing my nose at the state a little. And so what I would say is that sometimes we have to decide for ourselves what we want in our own town. There is a home rule part of land use law to a certain extent. And I'm not trying to sway anybody. I just like to throw the other side. Sometimes I'm so tired of hearing ORS that sometimes I just go, well, if we put the word temporary in and.
The problem is the ORS is horribly written.
Yeah, well, right. That's why I hate even, yeah, right. I mean, this is one of the reasons I hate that it's a sticking point in something we're deciding for our own community. It stinks that we have to do that. And it puts Garrett in a bad position. He makes a little more money because of it, but he has to make some tough choices and tough recommendations to us.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Ross, I wrote some language, I think, that you could consider replacing C1, that I think is directly responding to ORS 197493. I would propose, instead of the deletion, the replacement, and we add, except for a caretaker's unit as allowed as part of an RV park, no RV shall be used as a residential dwelling for non-temporary occupancy. I mean, ORS 197493 is only invoked if an RV is used as a residential dwelling. So just prohibit it from being used as a residential dwelling. And then I don't think you're invoking that statute at all. I don't know what more the city can do.
You're saying as a permanent residential dwelling, correct?
Permanent or non-temporary, so it then ties to the language that was used in Subpart D. I'm not tied to that particular last phrase. I think the key is to regulate that they shall not be used as a quote residential dwelling, which is as direct and on point to ORS 197493 as you could be.
So you're saying that pursuant to the ORS, the city may not impose any limit on the length of occupancy of an RV as a residential dwelling. You're saying we prohibit it to be used as a residential dwelling, and that's not a limit on the occupancy?
I think once you are saying an RV can't be used as a residential dwelling, then you've taken the issue outside of that statute in its entirety.
I think a good attorney could burn a hole in that. I mean, I see what you're saying. I like it, but I think that, you know, I would make the argument that when I'm in my RV, it's my dwelling. When I pull into your park and I hook up your sewer and I hook up your water and I hook up your lift, I'm living in my home.
Right.
That makes it a residence. It might be a residence that moves from place to place. And that would be the argument I would make if I were on the other side of that discussion. So I like your language, but think it needs some tweak.
Well, we're certainly not opposed to some further tweaking. Again, our
Maybe
interest,
I'm worried about Garrett, maybe I'm worried about something I don't need to be worried about.
I think, no, I think you have valid concerns, Gary.
I want to hear from Garrett.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's, hitting the issue squarely on the head. It is an issue, and the problem is that, the legislature hasn't clearly defined how you avoid the statute. And, part of it is, what is, as you mentioned, when does it become a residential use? Is it specifically a number of days? Is it the mindset of the person? Is it, any number of factors? They didn't define it in the statute, so that's a large problem for no matter how you view this issue of trying to define when it applies and when it doesn't.
Yeah. If you add the word primary, then it rules out the person that lives in their motorhome.
okay. Trying to time hawk a little.
Okay.
More questions? or-
I do have one question. So relative the study of 20 years and how RVs usage is increasing and I did some research online and in the last 10 or so years, there's been a decline in RV usage. There's been a glut of secondhand RVs, primarily because RVs are expensive to maintain. Gas is high. They have trouble finding places to park, leaving when they aren't traveling, having a place to put their RV. And so I kind of question the bottom line thrust of this idea to have an RV park in town for that tourist group. And I just wonder if perhaps a more current study with more recent in terms of events relative to climate change and how people are moving away from gas guzzling vehicles.
Well, I believe that the study from the RV Industry Association of America, RVIA, I believe it is. I'll look through the record, but I think it's 2 or 3 years old. So it's not dated. I think another item to consider about demand would be to look at the utilization of your creekside campground and the occupancy rates and the revenue that is generated there. That tends to be, and I believe that information's in the record as well. It's tough to reserve a spot there without being many months ahead and reserving it. And then the occupancy data that you have doesn't track what happens at the daily kiosk when people reserve. So it's only tracking your computer or your website reservations. So the popularity of that facility is definitely a data point which the applicant team has focused on in terms of the potential commercial viability of another RV park within the city of Sisters. So I'm happy to follow up on the date of that study from the RVIA, but
Wouldn't the RVIA be kind of a biased opinion? I mean.
I think any, who was it? Lies, damn lies and statistics. I think any interested group is going to be presenting its data in the most favorable light. But I've not come across anything that suggests that the RVIA is somehow trying to manipulate data to get people to buy more RVs or to develop more RV parks. It tends to just be a reflection of the data they have that shows the sale of these vehicles over the past 20 years.
we also included in the record, I think would be a
thank you.
clearly an unbiased source, Deschutes County's own recent study. The Deschutes County Commissioners commissioned a study to, look into the county opening its own RV park. The reason why they're doing that is no RV park has opened in unincorporated Deschutes County since, prior to the 1972, because of issues with Goal 14 and RV parks being considered an urban use. So Oregon State Land Use Law directs RV parks, at least with some significant amenities inside UGBs. And here in Deschutes County, if we look at the, the proliferation, the massive population growth since that period of time, like all services, RV parks are being overwhelmed, and that's leading to significant dispersed camping. So if you know the county commissioners at all, to find all three county commissioners aligned on a single issue is a rarity. And in this particular circumstance, all three county commissioners are supportive of finding any campground opportunity possible, including developing their own RV park to minimize this proliferation of dispersed camping and the dangers and impacts that causes on our natural resources, forest, fire danger, and the rest. And so there's some great information in the executive summary of that report that really talks about the substantially increased demand on RV parks within the community as a whole.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just want to say, Adam, don't lose that language. I didn't say it wasn't bad. I just.
Oh, no, I will. One last thing. I do know residential dwelling, that phrase itself was added in 2021 pursuant to House Bill 2809, and that was in response to some of the fires and some of the other things. So there may be some legislative history that we can look at to try and more particularly figure out a way to ensure that state statute does not apply in this case.
I mean, I have many, many questions about what that project would look like, but that's during the planning process, not now. And I understand the difference. But and I think I'm okay for now.
Okay. So unless there's any further questions for the applicants, I'm gonna cross that off the list. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it. Next up would be clarifications back to staff, if we have any. But really, the next item is close or continuation of the hearing, and we just need to talk about that. I kind of feel like we need to talk more about this in very general terms. So I'm not even really in favor of closing the hearing and just deliberating next time, because I think we still have questions. Does that seem fair?
I made that mistake of closing the hearing on a previous thing and it hit me in the butt. So I'm with you.
I greatly respect all the time that staff have in it, legal, the applicants, plan, the other 6 meetings, the public. I just think that this is too complicated to try and move forward to either deliberate tonight or even close the hearing and deliberate another time, because I think we're gonna have more questions.
I also, Mayor, we also are going to probably have more changes relative to the conversation tonight.
It's possible.
Right? So we
it's-
should allow public comment,
Yeah.
because there will be changes.
I think so. So I'm seeing kind of head nods all around. It's already late. We're not gonna finish this tonight. So I think we should negotiate a schedule to be determined a future meeting. City manager, jump in anytime now. What do you think? I mean,
Well, your next scheduled meeting is August 14th.
okay,
But we could have a special
You could,
meeting.
I will not be here for a special meeting.
I won't even.
And Garrett, they can hold the record open for a certain period of time, right? And then
Hey.
continue deliberations to their next meeting date in August.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole swath of options is before you guys, whether you want to, just leave a written record open, whether you actually want to hear more testimony at the next time you meet. All on the table. And again, we're, not under a clock, but,
I hate putting.
that
a
as
burden
well.
on anybody, But I think there's gonna be more testimony necessary.
Could we leave the record open for written testimony until a date certain, say 2 weeks before our next hearing, to give staff and council time to review that written testimony from the applicant and the opponents, and then not have verbal testimony at the next hearing?
I would have a question about procedure. Does that preclude staff giving us written information if we close the written record. I believe it does, doesn't it?
No, that's what she's saying. Leave the written record open, just not.
Well, only for a time certain. She's talking about stopping it before we, I think I'm not sure that I want to come into August and not be able to have more questions answered and those kinds of things. And so if we close the record, written record, or verbal record, I think that kind of means we're not talking to staff too, doesn't it? I don't know. I'm asking the question.
Garrett?
Yeah, you can certainly communicate with staff as to procedural and legal issues. Generally, if staff were to put a whole bunch of, substantive evidence into the record, then certainly there should be, that should come in while people have an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, I'm trying to think through what what information is going to be provided to the council that's also going to be useful for the public to respond to, giving them the opportunity to either review that if the applicant submits, say the changes that came through today, and then for folks to be able to review that and provide comment to the council, either
Does-
written or,
Does the planning
verbally.
commission need to see it one more time since it was approved without the last changes?
No, I think personally, I appreciate that they did it twice, or at least maybe three times. They talked about it. And they made their decision on it. Yeah, there's been a couple of small changes, maybe. But I think these are council level decisions that I'm okay with leaving here with us and not dragging them back in it and dragging those guys through it again. And
My questions are going to be related to, you've heard the ORS, and also whether or not this should be a conditional use as opposed to permitted use.
Mhm.
Those are things that are in the back of my mind as we look where we're going to go with this. And there are some other sort of procedural things. I mean, what do we try to do with the Conklin outside?
But are
Probably nothing, but
any of the issues
They're
that
really
have
not-
not already been brought up? And the public and the applicant have both had time
But-
to discuss those issues.
I would think-
They are not new issues. If they're not new issues,
Well,
they're,
I don't think we should have, you brought it up yourself, and I agree that I don't think that the RV should be permissible. I think it should be conditional use.
and that has been brought up and that's part of our deliberations.
okay.
And
It
I
has nothing
also,
to
and I
do with
also
new testimony.
And I also think that the lodging facility should not be permitted. It should be conditional use. Because we want to see which lodging.
Which is,
facility they're
again,
talking
part of our deliberation,
No,
not part of new testimony.
Okay,
I mean, I think the outstanding question is that section, C1 address, the changes addressing the ORS 196, 493. Do you want some additional legal analysis to put into the record and staff, information provided the record, and then keeping the record open long enough that we post that, say, in a couple weeks, and then folks have a chance to review that and comment on it prior to deliberations at your next meeting, right? So keep it open till maybe the end of the month, set a date, the end of July or something like that.
What's the danger in leaving it open to close to the next meeting so people have an opportunity to respond?
You could do that too. It's just, and it could even be a week before. It's just notice and provide the chance to assemble the packet and have it there.
it avoids
Yeah, it gives you a chance to
last
review it
minute.
too. Yeah, before the last minute, yeah.
Anyway, that's where I am. I'm okay with closing the verbal record. I had my question answered. I was concerned about we can still see information from staff in writing and those sorts of things. We can ask for that kind of a clarification. That was really my concern more than anything else, was I didn't want to back us into a corner like I inadvertently did with a certain other project. Sorry.
Okay, so we're going to, just to summarize this, we're gonna close the public portion of the hearing, but leave it open for written comments through the end of July, July 31st. Does that sound reasonable?
No, I think you said, I think.
About a week before was what I kind of heard, so maybe August 7th. Is that
Well,
enough time? I asked. them
She's
to-
got to make notification on
Right.
on 1 week ahead of time, 7 days.
So maybe.
And she sent it last Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
So what's the Tuesday, the week before, the 6th? Give you an extra day.
Well, I just want to add and perhaps ask Garrett for some clarification on any opportunity for response to that new information that's submitted during the open record period. So meaning that there's at least 2 time periods. First being a availability of any new information and then response to that new information.
So maybe going back to July 31st, that gives everybody a week to respond to it.
That's what I wanted to acknowledge if
Garrett,
that's
help us out.
appropriate here or if we should.
Yeah, so I mean, this isn't a quasi judicial proceeding where there has to necessarily be that response period. It's, it's legislative, so you could fix a date for, everything to come in.
Okay, so we're back to the 7th then of August.
probably. Give Rebecca some moments to breathe.
Yeah, I mean, I think packets usually go out the Thursday or Friday before the meeting. The 7th is probably gets time, but so, yeah.
We could just call it the 6th if you want, just give you an.
Okay.
I mean, we're not trying to kill you guys,
The 6th is fine.
Okay,
Some of them have vacation.
does everybody feel comfortable with that?
Yep.
If we're going to repost the ordinance, we've got to do it 7 days out, which means we have to post the ordinance. So for the record's just posting, I don't think there'll be time to put everything together for.
What's the Monday before that? Would the Monday before,
What do you suggest?
yeah,
Yeah.
the Friday before?
I would suggest the 31st.
Okay,
We're
Yeah,
back
that's
to the
21 days,
31st.
right? I thought we were further in the month than we.
that's okay.
It feels like it's.
Hey.
20th.
It's all a negotiation, right? Everything's a negotiation.
So that ends the public comment.
So we are,
So I'm gonna close the public testimony portion, but leaving the written record open until July 31st. Everybody agree with that?
Yep.
No problems with staff or legal? Okay, if there are no further questions, I will close the public testimony portion of this hearing, but we will leave the written record open until July 31st. The public testimony portion of this hearing is now closed, again, except for the written.
Do we want to specify the date for when we come back for deliberation? That being August 14th? Is that the intent here?
Yeah. We will start with deliberations at the next city council meeting, regular city council, meeting,
Resume.
August 14th. Okay.
Here at City Council chambers.
What did I say? Okay, city council meeting, August 14th. We good?
Yep.
At City Council chambers, time, place, and date.
yeah.
Yeah, here. It's a home game.
Mr. Mayor,
Sir,
point of a question or a concern. I believe we may have some people who have to get home. I don't, but I wonder if this would be, as much as I enjoy staff comments and mayor council business, maybe we move to the URA meeting so that that piece can get done, so that if we have someone who needs to.
we okay with not doing comments? Does anybody have a problem with that up here on the dais?
Or those who want to stay can stay.
Well, we told them that we would comment on a couple of things that some people said.
I know, but
Said we could.
yeah.
I'm trying to be,
Yeah.
No.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Any problem with moving up the URA?
No, we can always email.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna close the city council meeting.